partnerships between the authorities. Then, of course, we have a kind of collaborative data production. We call this citizen science. You can ride your bike, put a sensor on your backpack, and can collect air quality data, for example. So citizens, there is a strong partnership between citizens and the authorities or politicians, which is really new due to a certain data use. Then it's about collaborative mapping. We use OpenStreetMaps a lot, which is nice and very full of information that is interesting for us. It's about co-designing, and it's about co-decision making, and at the end, of course, co-producing, so implementing things together so that citizens not only advise the government, so that they really can come up with their ideas that can be realized in different processes then. You mentioned UNITAC, which is a new project. I don't go into details here, but this is again a lab that we now set up in collaboration with UN Habitat. Katja Schäfer is my colleague in Nairobi. I think a lot of people know her in the audience. And it's also an innovation technology accelerator for cities. So the City Science Lab is a kind of model for this UNITAC Hamburg now. And we have also thematic areas that you can see here. It's about open, transparent, and participatory governance. It's about mapping. And the third focus area is about people-centered smart cities. And again, what we do here is, again, that we set up now a lot of partnerships with a lot of different cities in the world. And we will work a lot on this notion of informal settlement. And then we come up with those issues like land use, social inequity, limited public infrastructure, you know, all this different issues that we address probably here in European cities. But again, it's a lot about collaboration and governance. And my last slide, and then my 10 minutes are up, is about the key challenges. You asked me to articulate some key challenges, and this is your question. How can multi-stakeholder partnership be designed to be productive, inclusive, and engaging? And my answer and my input to this panel is summarized here in this slide. Very important, initiate partnerships as early as possible. So the time factor is very important. Then refer to good overarching guidelines, SDGs or city strategies, whatever you have in your country, in your regions. Build on productive already existing structures. So I like the idea very much to work in ecosystems. Learn from your new partner's knowledge. So this is a mindset and attitude question, because there is so much technology in the world. When we come to another city, to another country, we always first try to learn what they already have. Create transparency, trust.
Can we mute the mics? Yeah. Excuse me, Dr. Zimmer. Yeah, no, can we mute the mic, please? Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dr. Zimmer.
Yeah, okay, no problem.
Go ahead. We don't hear you. We cannot hear you.
Sorry, now I'm back, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. It muted automatically, but now I'm back. Yeah, I said build on productive already existing structures. So I like very much the idea of working in ecosystems. Then learn from your new partner's knowledge. So we know that there's a lot of technology in the world. And when we go to another city, another region, we always try to learn from what they already have there. And also bring this back to our projects here. Create transparency, trust-based partnership. Act, not just talk. It's a lot about interactive tools, gaming, gamification. So people should have fun also when they use those tools, and then include different disciplines, heterogeneous stakeholders. And this is my last comment, find partners right at the beginning who want to continue the structures. So try to set up sustainable structures that they can run these projects by themselves, even if maybe experts from other countries or cities are not in the city anymore. So it's about co-learning, co-designing, co-producing. This is why I replaced partnership a little bit in this sense with collaboration. Thank you for listening. This was my input. I hand over to you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I think that the organizer will share the presentation because people are asking for this, and someone also, our colleague Leandri, is asking if we can have some of these tools. Obviously, I'm sure that we will share the presentation and the links to the tools that Hamburg has developed. As I didn't mention this, but in the beginning, after Dr. Zimmer, we will have all the presentations and the three short intervention, and then we will open, of course, the floor for you, for your questions. So please hand over your question or write them for the participants and our experts. The second presenter will be Madame Laura Kinia. She's leader, Design Cities from the London School of Architecture. She's host of the Open City podcast, Open City, advisor on the Ministerial Advisory Group for Architecture, and a built environment policy for Northern Ireland. She's a coordinator on urban governance for the UN Habitat University Network initiatives. Madame Lara Kinier, the floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, wherever you are. Can you hear me? All good?
Yes, very well.
Great. Right, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Let me just, no, that's not, I'm trying to get it larger for you. It's, right, are you able to see one slide at a time, or are you seeing more than one?
No, we are seeing only one.
Oh, perfect. Okay, well, let's give this a shot, and hopefully it'll work. You can tell me if it doesn't. So yeah, good afternoon, good morning. It's really a pleasure to be speaking to you about this, and also to have read your recent document as part of your strategic review. To see governance as part of this strategic plan for UN Habitat, or to have more emphasis and investigation into it, because I know it's always been there, is really wonderful. And also to read that you recognise and you want to establish more of a position for urban planning and design, and that being a central component of the renewed urban governance structure is also really encouraging. So I've been working across government, academia and private practice for 15 to 20 years. I love to try and find ways where the design of places can be delivered with effective governance methods. I've seen firsthand, having worked in government, that it's incredibly challenging sometimes when you're trying to deliver the design of places and the multi-stakeholders that have to be involved. You often reach conflict very quickly, and trying to bring people around the table and mediate to a positive outcome can be very challenging. So I wanted to start by saying that I think a fundamental role for research and academia in sustainable urban development is in its role to educate. And one statement that I've always kept close to my heart is this one from a Caracas think tank in 1993, which says, "Everyone wants to design, doesn't anyone want to think?" And I think that sums up what I've experienced in my education, but also in government, where there's an emphasis on doing, but not perhaps thinking about why you're doing it and what is the best way to do it and who ultimately is going to benefit from it. And so when I'm teaching, I like to think about the what, why, how and whom, to try and encourage students to not just focus on the what, but also to really focus on why, how and whom, because without those elements, what doesn't really matter. And for me, the how is all about governance. They often get separated, the what, why, how and who. And so that's why it's really critical that we try and keep them together and that governance stays as the foundation to all of them. There's a complexity to shaping the built environment, which is incredibly challenging, as I mentioned, but it's also the opportunity, because it's the much needed structure to bring together the complexities and to seek a mediation between the differences and tensions. And within academia and education in general in the UK, we have a big problem. The complexity of systems is often avoided and watered down to bite-sized pieces, thus destroying the opportunity for the learning of complexity and how you can manoeuvre around and in and through complexity. This is such an essential, critical skill set that we are denying our children and our young adults in our education system. And that's why it's so important that we try and bring this idea of the how into education, because that will ultimately bring forward the next generation of governance gurus. So in my specialism of spatial design and city planning, it's the complexity and governance is a critical component, and it's all about people, place and process. So I always begin when I'm teaching this notion of the urban barrister. I've found that this is the best way to explain to students how they don't just learn design, they have to learn how to communicate it, how to investigate it, how to put together a story, a case, and present it to a multitude of different people with different interests in order to try and win the case. The legal infrastructure, is an obvious process of governance, but how we can perhaps learn from that and apply it into different skill sets is something that I've been researching and practicing for a while. So being able to grow those skills of knowledge gathering and analysis, communication, knowledge and ideas, and presenting reasoning and mediation is the skill set that I think we're suffering a lack of at the minute. And what that often transfers into are these components in the education that we try and teach throughout urban design and at the London School of Architecture. So because of that complexity in shaping places for people that can have impact, we need an interdisciplinary syllabus. And a lot of the things I'm about to say are very much repetitive of what Dr. Giza has already said. So there's a lot of overlap, which hopefully is a good sign. But having interdisciplinary studies and a way to cross many different socioeconomic, environmental, spatial disciplines is really critical when you're shaping an urban context, because it's not just about one thing in silo. They all have to connect. So we have to teach an education programme that connects. The other thing we do at the LSA is we are geographically relevant. So the students start with an area of London to study, and it's their area of focus for their 2 years master's programme. And what that allows us to do is build up a library of data. It allows us to build up a network across the local authorities, across the community groups, and bring together all those different people into one space. And again, that was mentioned by Dr. Giza, the importance of a university being an impartial foundation or impartial platform for people to join. The other thing we have at the London School of Architecture is an apprenticeship model. So our students study for 2 days a week whilst they're working for 3 days a week. This also helps with finances. And we build an academic and public sector and private sector network. So we have over 100 private organisations as part of our university that join in teaching, that join in with our collective peer development programme. And all of that ensures that there is a cross-fertilisation of knowledge, not just in content, but also in practice. And again, that allows students to really understand the agency that they hold, rather than just learning the content. And finally, an element that we aren't doing at the London School of Architecture at the minute, but I've previously set up in other universities, is a public research office where we take commissions from government, from private sector, and again, using that interdisciplinary approach, we're able to bring different sets of information together and present it in a holistic way, which is often something that is quite challenging in local government, because let's face it, everything is in silos, and trying to work across those silos is always challenging. And when you look at the governance of London, this really sums up why you need that interdisciplinary process, why you need these people skills, to be able to transfer knowledge across different industries, because these bubbles represent all of the organisations that are involved in shaping London, and that's just London. You know, this would grow exponentially when you look at anywhere else. So trying to sum all of that up, I'm really trying to present the idea of a circular education model as being critical to the governance of society and the places that we try and design for society. We need to be able to bring together information for complex situations, because life is complex. We need to be able to broker relationships between academia, public, private and civic sectors. And we need to ensure that there's an understanding of the opportunities of agency. And all of this works fantastically within a university setting. As I've said before, having that impartial position at the starting point is really critical to the success. There's one thing, though, that always follows governance, and that is risk. And I think one thing that has been very clear in the pandemic in the last year is that because of a crisis, people have been willing to take more risk to try and deliver services for people in need. And I think there's a lot of learning in that, where we can demonstrate where governance models have to evolve and adapt, and they have to be agile. And that is often challenging when there isn't a crisis, but that is exactly what we need to try and establish. How can academia and research evidence the need for governance models to be agile, so that we can apply creative thinking on the everyday situation, not just in the crisis. Some very quick precedents of other academic models that I'm aware of, where they bring together urban design and planning and good governance. In the USA with the Stanford Global Project Center, they work in an interdisciplinary way within the university to solve problems in their surrounding environment and with governments. Then we have the Strelka Institute in Russia, who have in fact set up their own department within the government to deliver public works. And then we have the Gauteng City Region Observatory in South Africa, which is predominantly a research-based organisation, which gets 40% of its funding from the government. And they have a very strong, special relationship with the observatory and the university and the government. And so that triptych relationship really builds a triptych of trust, which then allows them to implement action on the research that they uncover. So in summary, again, to emphasise, governance is really about ensuring the what, why, how and whom are applied collectively. Education needs to be providing the life skills for life's complexities, not just content without application. Universities have an incredible offer of interdisciplinary, interpositional and intergenerational working methods. And they have the ability to bring together knowledge, research, skills development and implementation. And implementation, of course, being critical, because we all want to see research being acted upon and not just sit on a shelf gathering dust. And finally, that point about...
Please, can we mute the microphones? Sorry, Sarah. Hello? Please, can we mute the microphone? Thank you.
And just final point, the other critical offer of universities is they're there for the long term, as are governments. But of course, governments, the politics of governments can have a significant influence. And so having universities being a long-term custodian of a city or a piece of a city is something to really utilize more. And also they are able to be agile in much more successful ways than perhaps governments are. And I think when you're able to create these sorts of platforms within academic and research settings, and you have students coming together with city leaders, coming together with civic organisations and communities to learn in tandem, that's where the sparks fly. That's where you see huge potential, and you see the next generation of leaders that can implement successful governance and the growth that can happen from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Slara Kiniar. Very interesting and very promising, these sparks. We will now give the floor to Mr. Albert Edman, our third expert. And I would like also to apologize for the problem we have had with the link. I'm very sorry. I hope that everyone is now with us on board in this third segment on partnership. Mr. Albert Edman is a focus area leader for Cities in Transition in RISE, the Research Institutes of Sweden, and strategist for the Viable City Strategic Innovation Program. Mr. Edman has almost 20 years of experience working at local, regional, national, and international level with sustainable urban development. Currently, he works includes the piloting of mission-driven climate city contracting with 9 Swedish cities and the Swedish government, aiming to be climate neutral by 2030. We hope so, by and for its citizens. The highlight of a few key issues for us, he said before the event that you will be raising this would be great. Go ahead, Mr. Edman.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, so I'll thought I would complement Lara and Gesa's presentation by sharing an example from Sweden and a national innovation program called Viable Cities that we've been working with for the last 4 years, and how this is complementing setting up a climate city contracting approach, which I thought would be interesting as a case for this session. Just as you mentioned in the introduction there, that we are setting up a mission to have climate neutral cities by 2030 with a good life for all within planetary boundaries. This is the Swedish mission, but it's also very similar to the European mission that is just launched last year on 100 climate neutral cities by and for citizens. So I think this is a new approach to look at innovation, a mission-driven approach. It is based on the research by Professor Mariana Mazzucato, which I'm sure some of you may have heard of. But we have now piloted this in Sweden for the last few years, and I thought I'd just share some sense making of where we are in this and how this involves working together in different ways. So just to give you a context of what we've done, we are a strategic innovation program, which is funded by the Swedish government to 50%, and then by stakeholders across Sweden, from business, from public authorities, civil society, etc., academia, for the remaining 50%. And what we have done, which is unique among the innovation programs in Sweden, is that we focused on a flagship effort and a mission-oriented research and innovation approach. So we have piloted this in 9 Swedish cities, from rather small. The smallest one is Enköping with 40,000 inhabitants, and the largest is Stockholm with just over 1 million inhabitants. But they represent a large proportion of the Swedish population. What have they done? Well, they have developed a mission, each of them, based on the mayor's idea to move to a climate neutral city by 2030. And together we have developed a contract, a climate city contract by 2030, which is a new form of cooperation between the national level and local authorities based on mutual commitments. And it's signed by the mayors. At the moment, it's 4 government agencies and the Viable Cities program. We see it as a new form of delivery mechanism to connect national support, which is typically extremely siloed, I think in Sweden definitely, but probably in many countries around the world, to help cities in what they actually need to drive the transformation. So the Climate City Contract is, of course, a document. This is the signing ceremony, which was done digitally in December for the first version of this. But what I will come back to is also that we see this as a 10-year process. We're in it for the long run. We have a 12-year mandate, which is 10 years to run. So we'll be around until 2030, which is quite unusual in the Swedish innovation system. And we can work on revisioning this contracts. So we call it a contracting process. And I'll share some of the sense making of what this means in the next 3 slides, just to so what we're trying to sort of see how this works together is we have a number of Swedish cities at the bottom of this picture. See their names, Umeå, Gothenburg, Stockholm, Lund, Malmö, etc. Currently 9, we're now expanding this program to 20 Swedish cities, call it closest today actually. And at the top of your screen you have a number of Swedish ministries and agencies that fund and have different legislation responsibilities, policy context in Sweden for urban development. 4 of them are already signed and represents the Swedish government in these contracts. And the third party is the Viable Cities program, which is what I represent. But they all have different funding opportunities. They all have different mechanisms that they support. But what we've now developed is one contract per city. So the city has defined the roadmap to 2030. None of these cities actually know exactly how this will happen, because there needs to be a lot of changes in people's behavior, in new technology being developed, etc. But at least we've created the framework, and these contracts will then be updated every December. So there's an ongoing process of working together with the cities and the government to update and learn new things. And as I mentioned initially, this is also part of a larger context. We see this as Sweden's contribution to the European mission of 100 climate neutral cities by 2030. We don't think that all 20 cities that are part of the Swedish program will be part of the European program, but this is of course a larger thing in the end. We need all cities to move towards climate neutrality. So we thought we would take a broader approach than that. We know that some of the cities in Sweden will definitely go for being European role models as well in this. So that's also an important approach to try and connect national agendas with international agendas. And I think UN Habitat is also an interesting arena for us. And we have an ongoing memorandum of understanding that we are looking at how to develop this cooperation further. And the third sort of sense-making process that I wanted to share with you, and I share this in the spirit of this is work in progress. We are trying to find what is needed, because we don't really know. We know that we can't have this continuous fragmentation. We know that, for example, the city of Gothenburg, Sweden's second largest city, transformed its bus fleet from diesel to electric over the last 10 years. This required 40 different government contracts with different regulations to do something that was actually evident that was the right solution already from the start. But it was risked by siloed government regulations. Within the Climate City contract, we define that this is the roadmap ahead, and then government financiers or funding agencies can then opt in to go in, create a one-stop shop for transformation and support the transformation that we want. Setting up climate investments plans, where we know we need to involve public and private investors. The public sector has about 20% of the investments that is needed over the coming 10 years. The remaining 80 comes from the private sector, but also from us as citizens, house owners, owners of transport vehicles, food, buying food, etc. So getting citizen engagement to the next level and co-creating the cities is fundamental in this transformation that is needed here. And cities in Sweden are key stakeholders, and that's why we put them at the center of this transformation, where they have a political mandate to drive it. So I'm not going to go into this more detailed than that. I just thought I would share some of where we are in this process. It's 1 year in this climate contracting process, but we think it's very interesting, and we see that there's a lot of engagement being created by this cooperation model. So with that, I would stop my presentation and open up if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. We will just ask the colleagues to maybe hold their questions for you. We will have 3 short interventions, and then we will, of course, open the floor for the discussion and the questions. Very interesting sense-making exercise. I will ask you something about that. Can we please, do we have Ms. Joanne Irvin? From our sister agency IOM on the Migration and Sustainable Development Unit. The floor is yours, Joanne.
Thank you, colleagues. Can you hear me okay? Yeah?
Yes, very good.
Great. Apologies, I don't have a PowerPoint because I only managed to join the panel yesterday. So bear with me as you only see my face. I work with IOM in the Migration and Sustainable Development Unit in IOM HQ. I want to react very quickly to the previous presentations, which have really been so interesting. Thanks so much. So many, I feel, innovative ways to strengthen partnerships. From our perspective, and maybe from my inputs, I think we're going to come at this sort of the guiding questions that you've provided a little bit from the perspective of how to build such local partnerships for the inclusion of migrants and or other vulnerable or segregated groups who actually are often drivers of innovation and entrepreneurship and actually can force quite a lot of important social dialogue as well. So in terms of our work, I mean, we do a lot of work with our partners like UN Habitat, UNDP, etc., and of course our government member states to empower local and regional authorities and cities as they embark on local multi-stakeholder partnerships to ensure that migration governance can support sustainable development outcomes, essentially. I mean, and I think we can all agree that, you know, to what extent we can have, you know, productive, inclusive and engaging partnerships at local level will really be a determinant of whether we can actually achieve the 2030 agenda and other relevant commitments like the New Urban Agenda, like Paris, the Global Compacts on Migration and Refugees, etc. I mean, just echoing a little bit that linkage that we talked about to those sort of global frameworks. And, you know, for our perspective, if you want to have effective and coherent governance frameworks at the local level or in urban places, this does require strong partnerships at the local level. So for us, you know, this means moving away from very siloed approaches. And again, just, you know, I really just echoing also the intervention around climate change. There is often a massive issue of policy incoherence across the different sectoral policies that we see at the urban, at the national, but also in the urban governance setting. You know, in our sense, we see policies that are, you know, policies about, you know, health and education that should be inclusive of all, which are undermined by other types of migration policies or security policies or other or just discrimination in practice rather than legislatively. Which basically means that we are not able to conclude everyone in the community to have such partnerships, and because to build these partnerships you also need representation from all aspects of society in that sense. So what we do is that we work a lot to ensure, so we do 2 things. One is at the legislative or policy level, where we look for policy coherence in the area of migration and sustainable urban development by promoting the integration of you know, migrants and refugees or the issues around it, or migration in general, into urban planning processes, decision making, and of course, you know, for both documented and undocumented migrants to the extent that we can. And to do this, we need to really, you know, we have this mainstreaming approach, which we call, I mean, we can share some of the tools in the chat because, you know, we only have a few minutes to give you a little bit of an essence of what we do. We have this methodology, which is mainstreaming migration into urban tools, urban plannings, and we're developing with UN Habitat a tool on that as well, which will be a tool to help refine the legislative and policy framework at the urban level to be able to, first of all, on paper, ensure that we can have inclusion. So that, but of course, one thing is having it on paper, another thing is having it in terms of practice. And what we see and what we've learned in terms of working at the local level in cities and beyond is how to build those partnerships around the migration dynamic, to make sure that we are integrating migration governance into governance in general, and just not, again, going back to the silos, not doing it in silo. The essence for us around the social innovation and smart cities and how to build inclusion, really, it comes from making sure that you have that full representation. When we've been doing this in different cities, in different urban areas, in different local regional authorities, etc., what we've learned is that obviously, there is absolutely no one size fits all approach to this either. And maybe before I go into those sort of key lessons learned, I want to go back also to this really poignant point from the colleague from the London School of Architecture on the don't just do partnerships. Don't just do things, you need to think as well. So, we don't just do the partnerships, you build them, and to build them, there are some key things to consider. And this might also come off as common sense, but it actually can be really overlooked, especially when it comes to sort of segregated and more vulnerable parts of our populations. And so building on this whom part, so not just doing, but who, multi-stakeholder partnerships at the local level, they need to understand the partners. So we need to know who's out there, what their interests are, how they might want to engage, how they're already engaging, who's left behind, and what are the barriers to actually getting these partnerships going. And I think this really responds to maybe one of the guiding questions which was shared, which was how can we include the most vulnerable in these types of partnerships to ensure their inclusion. Consider also, we have to consider what kind of capacity development we might need to give to some of the parts of our population to understand how they engage in civic participation, to understand, how they even associate themselves. Vulnerable can also often mean poor. So we need to also provide physical spaces for people to meet, where migrants and refugees and other citizens can actually get there using certain transport, or even eventually, ideally, in their own neighbourhoods. We need to ensure that our society, especially the marginalised, do understand their rights and how to, for example, create their own associations and things like that. How can they create their own partnerships and partner with others? And I think we need to also, all of the innovation that we are seeing more, let's say, not only, but probably more because of the fact that we have more resources in the global north. Is that the same, and can it be applied in the global south? Is internet available everywhere? Does everyone have such digital tools? What kind of tools are actually relevant in the context that you're working in? How do we basically empower all of those parts of society who are not represented, who are not formed associations, who are not part of the partnerships that we're talking about? How, these are all these key things that we need to ask ourselves, and every time we do that at the local level, it'll be a very different answer. But the more we do empower them, the more that they can contribute to these partnerships and be part of these partnerships. I think obviously for us, it is very clear. Some of the elements already said was building around a common vision towards a common goal. And obviously from a migration perspective, this is extremely important just because of what can be a very negative public discourse or even political discourse around that. But broadly speaking, having this common vision so that you can address common goals, for me, is that why? Like, why are we having this partnership? So, again, once you've got the engagement and buy-in, what you need a common goal. You need to do whatever workshops and brainstorms and consultations that make sense in your context, so that you have an end game, and so that you are actually addressing specific social problems that do indeed contribute to things like the 2030 agenda, new urban agenda, etc. And then around that, for what we've seen, particularly around the migration governance aspect, is you do need a structure around your partnership. You need to have clear responsibilities for everyone. You need to have TORs. You need to have resources. You need to, as I mentioned before, build the capacity of those more marginalized or more excluded, so that they can also participate in that partnership. And obviously, you do need a driving force. The way that we've engaged with local authorities, has been very much understanding that they are the lead. They have the legitimacy towards the rest of the local partners, public and or private, who are at the local level. And so how can we empower those local and regional authorities in that sense, because they have that pivotal force? But at the same time, because the UN can support, others can support, donors can support, but we need to empower them to take that on, and so that they drive the partnership themselves, and that will get much more traction, effectiveness, and accountability, essentially. And then I think as well, one of the other things that we maybe overlook in a way when we're thinking about building partnerships is the time that it needs to build the trust, to ensuring that transparency, to have consistent communication, and to really build a horizontal relationship where everyone's interests are met. And the thing is, because there are so many interests, and if you are being really inclusive, including all those different aspects of our society in any type of a partnership or project, that takes a lot of time, and it takes mistakes and misunderstandings, etc. But again, if we don't invest in that, the results that we have will suffer. And then finally, I think maybe just one key issue for us especially is, well, I mean, I think it's broadly for everyone, the local partnerships can be bolstered with national support, and they can be scaled up and supported to be, and the innovation that comes out of such partnerships when we do anything in relation to sustainable development, integration of migrants, which, in any of those areas can, often the only way that is actually able to be done is that the local and regional authorities or the cities actually have ownership and competencies, and they have human and financial resources, etc. And the thing is, we're talking, examples we've had so far are very much from a very privileged sense within Europe. Not all cities also in Europe, when you talk about secondary or smaller cities or in the global south, have that. They don't necessarily have the support and buy-in or competency sharing or allocation of such resources from the national level. And so national governments have to be part of what we talk about when we talk about urban governance, because it can't happen in a vacuum. Because again, if we are also going to achieve things like the Sustainable Development Goals, the Global Compacts and different things like this, it has to come up into, it has to be aligned with and support the national strategies as well. And so how do we make that link? I mean, the way we do it from a migration perspective is we really empower a lot of the governments through vertical coordination. So while we're working to support and empower the local authorities around a certain topic and making sure that they're inclusive of migrants and others, we make sure that there is a really good dialogue and coordination between the national and the local, because otherwise, we again operate in a sort of, let's say, a silo and a different approach, which is we do things at the local level, they really work, it's really good, but no one really knows about it. The national doesn't support it necessarily, and others can learn from it as well in the same country or territory. So, I think that's maybe what that definitely sort of highlights the main sort of experience from our side. I know that my colleague Alison is sharing some tools, because I think, in terms of lots of the methodologies and examples that we have, I don't think we have time to go into them so much. But as I mentioned, maybe just some last points would be, not only do we need to engage, the UN and the partners need to engage also at the national level to actually take the lead in engaging and supporting and empowering the local level in such innovation, because as we know, that's where it happens. So, there's other ways as well to actually bring cities together around topics, networks of cities. From our perspective, we are part of the Mayor's Mechanism, which is part of the Global Forum on Migration and Development, which is state-led, and we're supporting these efforts to actually help forge these links between the national and the local and regional levels, which also includes civil society, private sector, etc. And obviously universities and academia. And so, for example, as a part of that mechanism, there is now a call to action being put in place to have cities sign up and commit to achieving certain objectives in the Global Compact on Migration and the Global Compact for Refugees. One of the program that I manage, or one of the programs that we do out of HQ, as well as this global program on making migration work for sustainable development. And again, we're empowering subnational levels of government while applying a whole of society approach, so that it's not just protecting the vulnerable, it is empowering migrants as equal parts of society who can also contribute to development when they have the equal type of access to services and capacities and education as others do. And so, you know, we look at it very much from a positive sense in not only protecting, but ensure of, like, in that sense. And so what we do, as I mentioned, is that we create these vertical coordination mechanisms and within that to sort of really make sure that what we learn at the local level is being taken on at the national level, and policies are revised, and that we're supporting the sort of like the decentralization or the empowerment of the local authorities in these roles. And one really key, very, very recent, which maybe you talked about it yesterday in the other session, but there is now a new... This is my last point.
2 seconds left, please. There are only 2 other, please, participants. Go ahead.
Thank you.
You can wrap up.
This is my last sentence. And so, and the one, maybe just the last thing, which is really good from a UN perspective, is that there is this newly formed UN task force on the future of cities. IOM is contributing that really actively, and this is going to be an excellent opportunity for the UN to really support national governments, to support local governments, and to help kind of like, you know, to really foster those types of partnerships that can see the kind of solutions to social problems that cities are already kind of doing on their own, but could get help with in terms of sharing and scaling up, etc. So I'll stop there. Thanks so much. I'm happy to answer other questions in the chat or later when we have the open part. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanne. Very interesting about the inclusion and how also can the national support the local to assure these innovations are really introduced in their policies. We have still 2 small intervention, I hope. Annelle Duplessis from Northwest University and Frédéric Saliez after, and then we will open the floor for the question. I would like also on behalf of the organizers to apologize once again because there is a mix-up with the links that has been sent, and we hope that now everyone is on board with this very interesting conversation going on. So please, the floor is yours, and Annelle Duplessis. Maybe Annelle is not with us. Annelle?
Hello, no, I am.
Hello?
I am. Just a second.
Good.
I am with you. There we go. Good afternoon, everyone, and an apology up front. I was supposed to participate yesterday and I prepared such, but we had a power outage in my region for close to 14 hours and I could not participate. I'm very wary that we've got very limited time left for this afternoon session. And I'm only going to give a few interventions without using PowerPoint. I was supposed to be a commentator yesterday afternoon and I missed those presentations. I was particularly interested yesterday to comment on the localization of the SDGs, which is not exactly befitting the session of this afternoon. But I do think that at least 3 of the things that came forward during the presentations we had this afternoon is quite important for understanding the localization of the SDGs from a Global South perspective. So my name is Annelle Duplessis and I'm from the South African Research Chair in Cities, Law and Environmental Sustainability in South Africa. And it's from that perspective that I'm arriving at the issues that we are talking about during this 2 days of deliberations. And the one important, or the first of the 3 things that I want to latch on is this idea of a laboratory, the lab idea that we had during the first presentation this afternoon, which also links very much, in my view, up to the idea of forging more engagement and partnerships across sectors within government, between the 3 spheres or even more in some countries, levels of government, if you like to call it that. But then also between the private sector, increasingly important, the linkages between the private sector and community and cities as publicly governed authorities, and then other parties such as academia. The one thing we should not underestimate from a Global South perspective is the role of politics. And when we talk about labs, and that was the one point that struck me is that a laboratory bringing parties together is free of the politics. And in many of the Global South countries at the moment, cities are the hubs, so to speak, of political turmoil. And it's for very, well, not good reasons, but understandable reasons that is the case. And I think this idea of laboratory should be explored further. And in greater depth within a Global South perspective. And I think there are many people on this call that represent the Global South understanding, even though you may not be situated in the Global South as such. But this idea of the labs, I think, is something that UN Habitat in its governance work can definitely take further. It's one that I like very much. The second, when we think about the discussion around governance, is for me the understanding of the inclusivity, safety, resilience, and inclusivity that we talk about in the SDGs. Collaborations should have an end goal in mind, and an end goal might be a strong word. But I think that we've committed as a global society to these 4 ideals when the Sustainable Development Goals were signed, and that collaborations should try and focus on some of those specifically, or those 4, but also in combination. And I'm not always sure that we are focused enough in collaborating in terms of the greater goals. Sometimes our collaborations have more shorter term or very specific outcomes, such as carbon emissions. It's a carbon emissions project, or it's a project where there's new developments around a greener environment or public spaces or whatever you like. There are so many examples, too many to mention. The third thing which I am not hearing and which I can perhaps bring to the table with my legal background is that sometimes the things that we are talking about this afternoon, especially collaboration and improved partnerships, is hamstrung by the law. And I have a very strong suspicion that it's not only my own experience within my own country, but that the legal dynamics in combination with the politics sometimes is a great barrier in optimally using collaborations. And I think there's a need to rethink the role of the law, not only in urban governance in general, but certainly also when we talk about improved partnerships. And it might even be that we need to improve our understanding and deepen our understanding of alternatives to hard law, where we know about contracts and we know about formal agreements between parties when we talk about collaborations, but that we might want to explore in greater depth the idea of the traditional memorandum of understanding or memorandum of agreements, because sometimes, especially because of the politics, you need an agreement of sorts to see a partnership outlive local councils, for example. Many partnerships we do want to see flourish and exist for far more than 4 years, which is often the term of office of officials in city authorities. So, Chair, if you don't mind, I'm going to leave it at that for us to leave some time for the discussion this afternoon. And I know we've got one presenter left, but I am more than willing to engage in the Q&A after the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anel. Thank you for being with us today. We will continue with Mr. Frédéric Saliès, the Program Officer at UN Habitat Office for Europe and European Institutions, who is based in Brussels. The floor is yours, Mr. Saliès.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm aware that the time is very limited, so I will simplify it to very few ideas indeed. So I think you should be able to see my screen. Please confirm. Can you please confirm that you see my screen?
Yes, we see your, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, that's perfect. So I just want to share a few consideration that derives from a project that we just concluded, which is called the Urban Maestro, New Government Strategies for Urban Design. It's a project that we implemented together with the University College London and the Bouwmeester Maître Architect Office, which is a public administration office in Brussels. A few consideration of context, and I think, it will resonate a lot with what has been said previously. We were looking for that project at urban design, and strong statement is that quality in urban development does not happen by accident. It is in fact produced by a great number of intervention, a great number of stakeholders over a long time and an extended space. But more importantly, what we see is that ecosystem of producing urban development is ruled in European countries by very sophisticated laws and regulation, but that sophisticated laws and regulation do not necessarily guarantee the quality that everybody aspires. So these sophisticated laws are good at preventing the worst form of development, but they do not really guarantee the quality outcome. And that's what we wanted to look at. So if we took from the perspective of the local government, we see that this process of producing urban development, urban spaces, is something that you may govern by mobilizing formal and informal tools. And so we in this particular project, we focused on the informal tools, the soft power, if you wish, through which the public authority can have an influence and can drive urban development to certain objectives. So for that, we developed a typology, which I will not explain. I mean, just to mention that this typology makes a strong distinction between the formal and the informal tools, and then has identified a number of different categories, which are quite wide. And we looked at we searched for case studies, examples across Europe mainly, trying to identify, which are the ones. I mean, how successful cities or successful projects have mobilized informal tools in complement to formal tools to achieve that success. And the study revealed a very rich universe of tools across European cities, which shows that in the informal category, there is a very wide range of options between, if I simplify, what we call participation and what we call leadership. In fact, if you unpack this notion, you discover that there is a very wide menu of possible strategies that public authorities can adopt to drive their political agenda about the city. And I think the example of the Viable Cities program in Sweden is a good example of that. I know the Urban Pact as such is a tool that local authority may decide to mobilize in order to achieve certain results. So if there is one key lesson from that process is maybe a bit simple, maybe a bit common sense, but it's the notion of alignment. I mean, we show evidence that hard and soft power strategies are much more effective when they are enabling each other, when they support each other, when they are aligned. I mean, we always say, we need alignment across different sectors and policies, but in fact, we also need alignment within the same sector. And we often see authorities engaging in, on the one hand, having a certain regulatory framework for urban development that sort of pull development towards one direction, and then another policy which is typically softer on having pacts or co-governance mechanism or competitions or peer review mechanism or other types. that may pull into another direction. And so we really see that the most successful cities, most successful public authorities in that aspect are the ones who can effectively articulate these two aspects. And to conclude, so just to show the relevance of that for UN Habitat, I mean, this project has suggested a typology that unites formal and informal tools, quality culture and quality delivery tools, so tools that are meant to support the quality, support the culture of quality, and tools that are meant to support delivery of qualitative projects. Also linking financial and design aspects, top-down and bottom-up processes under a single framework. And I think that this is really important because traditionally in the work of our organization, we've promoted a lot participation and all other forms of soft power intervention. And in fact, as my colleague Laura Petrella said at the concluding dialogue, the UN, you know, we are fundamentally a soft power organization. I mean, that's all what we can do is this power of influence and inspiration. And so that is, I think that this there is a need. I don't say that, you know, this typology is the one that should be applied to everything, but there is a need to reconcile this dimension of formal and informal into something that puts it together. Also because it legitimizes these soft processes that typically tend to be overlooked by governments. And final consideration, side consideration perhaps for the future, but we also saw and did not really explore, but that there is a bright and a dark side to this notion of informal governance that needs to be further explored, as well as the relevance of the concept beyond the European context. So with this, I will conclude this intervention. There is the website there that you may want to consult for further details. Thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Frédéric. We will now end with Ms. Lambrecht, Senior Consultant in Urban and Regional Planning, working with the United Nations, working also with the World Bank and regional development banks in developing countries. Over to you. It's a short intervention, and we will open the floor hopefully for 5 to 10 minutes after that.
Hello everyone. I was not aware that I had to do a presentation. I'm just hearing it now. Actually, I thought I was just part of the pool that was going to reply, but I did take some notes. Okay, so I will just look at my notes and give my comments. I've been listening carefully to what has been said today and yesterday also, and I would like to make the link maybe to what we discussed yesterday and then come back to these partnerships. Yesterday we talked about multi-level governance, and I was actually surprised that the agency still remains with this multi-level governance that I feel is a concept from the 90s or even from well before, and come back to what Frédéric just has explained, is also a concept that is being promoted especially by the European Union and maybe not very suitable for developing countries, because it still takes into account a hierarchy ordered government as a starting point. And that is what I want to talk about. We cannot get participation if we stick to this starting point. And even in the report that we received for this meetings, there is still this idea that central and local government have the central stage. Yeah. And I would like to make a case to make a shift and to look at other modes of governance. And then I find network governance. It's something that also came up during the discussions already. But it is a mode of governance that is currently being explored, and it is giving a lot of ideas about partnerships. And this mode of governance is based on co-production, on true co-production, and especially equal treatment of stakeholders. And I do agree that the central government still needs to play its role. We cannot just open the floor. They have an important role to play, but that role is changing. Yeah. I would say they have to set the rules, and that also came up already. They have to develop the strategies. So they have to set the rules of the game for the other actors, and then leave it to the other actors for them to do what they want to do within those rules. And I would like to quote someone called Rhodes that has researched quite a lot on governance. And he said there is a need to shift to a distinctive managerial style based on facilitation, accommodation, and bargaining. And that's also something that has come up yesterday. And in order to do that, a new set of skills is needed. And I think that is something that UN Habitat really can work on. Recently, I've seen it myself when I was in Nigeria and Zimbabwe, how this is really necessary, and the governments are demanding it, but it's very difficult to give a reply, and that needs more guidance. And I really see a role for UN Habitat there. About network governance, there is a lot of things to explore, to be explored. Important is the aspect of management. The government as a manager of all these different stakeholders that we have in governance. We've seen so many slides today and yesterday with all these networks. So we need someone that really can manage these networks. There's other roles that the government needs to play. They need to look at how the resources are distributed so that all these different stakeholders have adequate resources, also community-based organizations. The issue of trust has come up. We can work on how do we build this trust? How do we connect governments to citizens? And then, how can we assist these stakeholders to be empowered? Yeah, so that they can regulate themselves and play their role. There's also the issue of the flexibility that has come up that is very important, because nowadays in urban development things are changing so quickly. So we need this notion of authority is in fact changing rapidly, and we need systems that are agile and that can adjust to this ever very quickly changing context. I think I would leave it to that, just making a case for network governance and really look into all the type of tools that they have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hilde. We will maybe now open the floor for 5 minutes of questions or interaction. I would like also to say that lots of the material and links and documents have been shared in the chat box. And also some questions have been asked by some colleagues, have been also answered by Joanne. So colleagues, if you have any questions for our experts and interventions, please go ahead. We have 5 minutes for that. There is a presentation. There is a question, sorry, from Pablo for Professor Zimmer about the work of her lab. He is asking if aren't we putting excessive focus on data and the smart side of cities? If we let technology dictate our lives and those companies behind it, what are we left with at the end of the day? What is the human side of cities? The face-to-face interaction, the mundane, the serendipitous moment of urban life, The COVID-19 pandemic and resulting lockdowns in multiple locales around the world have precisely made us realize of the value of those interactions and how not everything can be replaced with Zooms, Teams, and the likes. So the question is for you, Professor Zimmer, a difficult one.
Yeah, thank you, Pablo, for this very important question. I think we are all Zoom tired and all a little tired using all these digital tools. But I mean, I think it's an important question. I mean, I always think that technique is already there. I mean, there is so much technology in the world always. I mean, we use smartphones, and I mean, I don't have to name it now all here. And my idea is always that we have to find good ways of using it and good ways of working with it. And when I speak about, or when I look into the future of cities, I would say the way how we use technology in cities is one of the most important questions that we have to face. And we can reject it, or we can say, okay, look, we have it, we have data, we have new ways of mapping data, we have new ways of visualizing data. And I think transparency data use is very, very important for cities. And it's very important for us that we don't leave companies organize our data. It's very important that cities stay independent, that they educate people well, that they have also financial capacities, of course, to set up, for example, urban data hubs, so that data is accessible for people, that they inform people about whatever, about where's my next school, where's the next kindergarten, what kind of social infrastructure can I address for certain problems. There are so many issues. And I mean, my utopian maybe way of thinking about cities is that we researchers, but not only researchers, also the UN, other people can help making this data accessible. And also, I mean, I like what Lara said at the beginning, that it's also about education or creating awareness of data use. And I really think that the world needs a kind of SDGs of how smart cities should work, because it's a very, very important humanitarian question at the end. If we as a society will be able for the future to keep the rights for our data and to establish a kind of data sovereignty in societies. And my work, and also I think the work of UNITAC, this new initiative from the UN, is about this. And I think the question why UNITAC as an idea arises is also because the United Nations get aware of that how we use technology for cities is one of the most important questions for the future for all of us who we are all involved into urban planning. So this is my answer to you.
Thank
Pablo.
you, Dr. Zimmer. I hope that, Pablo, this answered your question. We maybe have only one other that is in the chat box, or maybe the last one. For Joanne, can you expand a bit on the absorptive capacities of cities, how to regulate that, the global urban minimum, for example? Thank you. Joanne? Yeah.
Thanks, colleagues. Yeah, no, I mean, I did write a bit of response, but just maybe to clarify a little bit more is, you know, we are not coming from a perspective of stopping migration or regulating migration. We're coming from a perspective of migration happens. It's a part of every country, every city, every community, and the way that it takes shape. If we understand that, then we can understand how to manage it well for the benefit of everyone. And so that's why I really put the emphasis on understanding, and this is where it comes into really actually engaging with those parts of society to like actually understand the data around migration, around internal migration, where they're coming from, why that's happening, what kind of opportunities are there, are they moving on towards international, you know, crossing borders, etc., and how that affects education, how it affects employment, how it affects spatial, you know, spatial issues, urban sprawl, different things like this in a city. Because if we know that, then we can work around that to basically sort of, let's say, limit the negative and really sort of maximize the positive when it comes to migration. Because in the end, we're talking about citizens, whether they're migrants or not. And so it's about inclusion for everyone. It's about trying to get the same accesses and services, and sometimes indeed having to have specific services for specific people who are more underprivileged or more challenged with issues like discrimination or language barriers or gender or etc. And so, you know, and also to say that we can say what is a minimal or maximum kind of absorption for any city would changes constantly, because people are coming in and out constantly, and it's not just migrants that are coming out constantly. It's like it's the commuters, it's the consideration of how cities expand and just absorb peri-urban areas and become bigger urban areas. So that's not even necessarily migration, but it's just the way that the city has expanded. So but migration can be and can affect urban governance and vice versa. So so the whole point for us is, if you don't consider the migration aspect in urban governance, then you won't be able to really address it from an integral sense across all the different policies. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Joanne, for this. I think there is a last question. I don't see it, from Jaideep. I think that Albert has answered, but go ahead, Jaideep, if you want. I don't find the question. Yeah, the question is here. What are the best ways to transfer cross-city learning in the North, Germany, Sweden, to cities and cities networks in the Global South? I think that Joanne has tackled it a little bit, but go ahead, Albert, or Dr. Zimmer, or whoever wants. We have only 2 minutes left.
I can start just a brief. I put an example in the chat on an approach called the gender landscape approach, which is developed by the city of Umeå in Sweden, which I think has been really successful in building city-to-city partnerships on gender equality in urban development with cities across the world. But I think also what we've seen within Sweden is that we have set up something called Urban Transition Labs within the Viable Cities program, where cities actually challenge to go beyond this. Sometimes happening, cities are competing between each other, rather to work on the challenges. And by having this mission, it's quite clear that they have a common target and a direction to work towards. And then it doesn't matter what the starting point is, you align and you aim for the common direction. I think that is a success factor, whether it's gender equality or climate neutrality or whatever the mission is. But I think that's good to have.
And my very, very quick answer is to Jaideep. This is a very important question. We try to set up mixed teams. I mean, if we now address a certain challenge in a city, wherever it is, we try to find equally, like having people from there and from here, computer scientists. They are very, very easy in collaborating with each other very quickly. I like that a lot. They are super uncomplicated and they immediately start coding. And this is then hopefully something that is that works well for UNITAC.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Dr. Zimmer, Mr. Edmond. The takeaway of Lara is very interesting too for the UN, and we will take note of that. Some of the key points that I would like to share with you would like, first of all, thank you very much, all our experts, and all the very rich intervention and interaction in the chat box. Just a summary of the key points are the following, that what emerged from all the speakers that the World of Academia is a neutral broker between the government and citizen. We will also identify collaboration as important. The co-learning, co-design and co-producing is very important. We will also need to have an interdisciplinary process and different components and develop the opportunities to explore the digital data for partnership, including transparent, this is very important, trust, data use, combining civil society, politics, economy, science. The key challenges that we have seen in your presentation, the time factor, the overarching guidelines like the SDGs and some other maybe are necessity, building also on existing structures. Also, we need to have the mindset, the attitudes, learning from others. This is, we need to be open, building trust. This can take time through transparency, interactivity, inclusion of different disciplines. This is also very important of what has been shared by Frédéric, establishing partnership which lasts through the whole process. So a new set of tools is needed in order to enable, empower, facilitate, build the trust. We would like to thank you again, and I would like to hand over to Pontus, who will moderate the next session on Dialogue 4 on digital governance. Again, we apologize for the mix of links. I hope that everyone is on board, and we will continue, of course, in the chat box to share and to send also the links. And of course, this conversation is registered. Thank you all, and over to Pontus for the next session.
Thank you, Ida. Very interesting discussion so far, and I hope that we can continue it in the next session. I thought that Pablo's question to Professor Geza there at the end was a very good segue into this next dialogue, which is on issues to do with digital governance. My name is Pontus Westerberg, and I'm a program manager in UN Habitat's Innovation Unit, and I'm going to guide us through this next hour and a half or so. You know, as has been discussed a little bit, this change in technology that we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years has gone really, really quickly. But the governance frameworks and our mechanisms for governance have often failed to keep up. You know, as has been raised, the data and digital platforms have a real profound impact on our urban life. And there's a kind of new imperative for local governments and other urban stakeholders to really take a strategic approach to technology and ensure that it has a positive role in all of our lives who live in cities. I think what we've seen over the last 10 years or so, particularly in the smart cities field, if we like to talk about that, is what we might call supply-driven solutions. Often technology that has been developed elsewhere, coming to cities, coming to local governments, and looking for use cases, to use the kind of lingo there. And I think that what we need is to move to a much more demand-based approach to technology, where the needs of cities, of local governments, and of course the people that live in them take center stage. And we need to ensure that we reduce fragmentations and ensure better interoperability. Data, of course, is super important. Who should collect it? Who should manage it? How are you allowed to monetize it? How can you share it? How should it be shared? Should it be open, closed? Huge issues here and discussions that really go to the heart of governance, and that cities are only now, I think, really coming to that discussion. And of course, we have the whole issue of the digital divide and digital rights. We're of course really excited about the potential, the positive impact of digital technologies, but I think we also need to realize that the new digital world also causes a lot of new inequalities and exclusions, and this of course needs to be dealt with. We have a fantastic panel in the next session to talk about all of those issues. We have, first of all, Professor Edgar Petersey. He's the founding director of the African Center for Cities at the University of Cape Town, and he holds the South African Research Chair in Urban Policy. Then we have Emily Royal, who is a data professional and urban planner who works towards equity in smart cities. She's the Smart City Coordinator at the Office of Innovation for the City of San Antonio. Then we have Dr. Non Arakaprastakul. He serves as an expert in smart city promotion at the Digital Economy Promotion Agency of Thailand, where he works to advocate the concept and practice of smart cities. Then we have Serge Navarrete, who is a policy and program manager at the European Commission, working on public sector modernization, digital public services, and e-participation. Those are the four presentations, and then following that, we will have a short intervention by Joachim Formo, who is Strategic Design Director at the global telecommunications company Ericsson. And then we will open up for discussions and questions. So without further ado, let me hand over to Professor Edgar Petersey, who is going to tell us about inequality and how to strategically prioritize forms of collective access to ensure digital rights. Over to you, Edgar.
Thank you very much, Pontus, and I'm really pleased to be part of this process, and thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts. Not entirely sure I will hit the mark on your brief there, but I thought I'll, given the limited time, I guess just unpack digital inequality a bit and then point to a few suggestions of what I think UN Habitat is uniquely placed to potentially drive both at a global scale, but also at a national and urban scale. So I guess the first point, and it's always difficult to speak on this topic in this particular audience, because everyone is deeply steeped in the broader dynamics of the state of the world and the challenges that confront development, and the extent to which SDG 10, the question of inequality, is at the heart of many of our challenges. But be that as it may, it's often useful to be reminded of some of these broader challenges. So of course, the first point to make is that we have to understand digital inequality as an extension of economic, social, and spatial inequalities. And as the contemporary sort of late form of capitalism and the financialization of capital embedded in very particular forms of real estate markets is taking shape in different urban contexts around the world, we see, in fact, an exacerbation of the digital divide or digital inequalities. Now, there are, of course, a number of drivers of this divide, and it's important to differentiate between them, because if we don't do that, then we may simply think that it's a question of access to the internet or access to broadband. And of course, it is a more complicated story. So I guess the first main driver to mention is, of course, something that is particularly acute in energy poor regions such as Africa, which is limited infrastructural access combined with generalized poverty and very low and erratic household incomes. And of course, in this regard, we need to remind ourselves that up to 70% of the labor force globally, in the global south at least, is trapped within the informal economy and precarious work. And so this is a huge sort of macro constraint in terms of affordable and sustained access to basic infrastructures. Secondly, we also witness in many parts of the world still very poorly designed and ineffectual governance regulatory frameworks of the digital economy. And as a result, we often see that the ICT sectors is often streets ahead of regulation. And this mismatch is often a driver of some of the unfortunate outcomes that we see at the moment. Now, within that, of course, there are certain very specific political economy challenges related to the information and communication technology sector. So let's just call it the tech sectors in shorthand. And one, of course, is just the centrality of the proprietary knowledge model that lives at the heart of that. Secondly, we see that there is this absolute frenzy to monetize what I would call biosocial data. And recently we've seen, even in the context of a pandemic where the importance of the commons and universal access is absolutely agreed upon by all stakeholders, we still witness the kind of vaccine hoarding and the lack of a willingness to share IP around something as essential as that. But this speaks to a larger fabric condition within the global economy, I would argue. And then, of course, there's this constant undermining and failure of instantiating digital rights, as has been endorsed by the United Nations. So these are some of the challenges that underpin why we see such poor regulatory frameworks. The third sort of drive of digital inequality, I would argue, is just the very limited and very provisional embedding of ICT within particularly educational systems. And so what we see as there's a much closer correlation between educational attainment and incorporation into a services-dominated economy. This problem means that social inequalities, in a sense, are more tightly connected with digital inequality. And then something which isn't often spoken about in the literature, but I would argue is incredibly important and will become even more so, is what one could call the linguistic mismatch between the digital economy and, of course, the vernaculars of majority populations that are currently vulnerable or excluded. And then finally, an important driver I think that we shouldn't underestimate is just the extent of political opposition because to the democratization of digital technology, because of the possibilities in terms of democratic oversight, and of course the real risk of what would be perceived as risk of dissent in these societies. And of course, we've seen an intensification of that more recently in many geographies across the world. Now, the point to take away from the sort of stratified understanding of the drivers of digital inequality is that what digital inequality produces is a stunting of social mobility. And so as a developmental problematic, it's important to recognize that it's not just about having the right policies in place, it is about measuring the extent to which we see intergenerational benefit and access to economic, social, and other opportunities. Now, of course, then very pragmatically, we know that there's also a whole number of dimensions to the reproduction of inequality outside of these drivers, and that is just sort of access to the physical hardware and the internet itself. And then this can be differentiated from what one could call the use divide. In other words, the number of people who may have some access, but they don't have the skills around how to optimize access. And then there is what is termed the use proficiency gap. In other words, one has access, has some sense of how to use these tools, but aren't proficient at mining access to this knowledge for very particular purposes. And so to recognize that stratification is important because it will help us to think more strategically about how to program interventions. Now, what is important about this is that we've got to recognize that in a context of high levels of poverty, sort of large degrees of lack of access to basic services, we've got to understand that we need not just access to digital infrastructure, but we need a radical strategy for social inclusion through a new generation of infrastructures, which are decentralized, low carbon, focused on sort of a battery of service delivery opportunities for the urban poor, and of course, upgrading and placemaking. And so we've got to embed the challenge of digital access within that frame, because in fact, it really comes into its full and is able to address some of these structural inequalities by attending to a larger set of drivers of urban inclusion and flourishing for the urban poor. Now, what does this mean practically, to conclude then with sort of 2 or 3 very specific institutional agendas? I think firstly for UN Habitat, it is very important to be ambitious, to take up a global role. And under the rubric of the Secretary General's roadmap that was published in last year, to convene a global conversation between UN Habitat, academic institutions, movements of the urban poor, in direct dialogue with the tech industry, right? And what is the focus of this? The focus of this has got to be to tease out what would be an enabling regulatory framework and how one can deal with some of the political economic constraints to that. And of course, this has to then pragmatically lead to a conversation about incentives and how one brings them in. But I think to simply, if you will, build a critique from a rights perspective in a context of these enormous power asymmetries with the large tech companies, it's a missed opportunity to not open up a very direct, focused and normative dialogue. Secondly, I think it is important to nurture a number of practical reference points about what does people-centered smart city role models look like, and to put that within open source lab context where we can begin to really understand how we deal with these different drivers of digital inequality in a very practical setting, and to, if you will, disseminate that knowledge as quickly and as urgently as possible. And then finally, I think it is important to recognize the regulatory gaps that we see at a national and at the city level. And I think for this to kind of find traction within political and institutional, municipal institutional context, we've got to recognize sort of a hierarchy of access, right? So the first line of access, particularly in least developed and lower middle income country context, of course, is that overlap between internet access, mobile data, and electricity. So let us not forget that the vast majority of residents in most of sub-Saharan Africa still don't have access to affordable and reliable electricity. And then the second one, I would argue, is health and educational benefits, just because of its spillover effects. And then I think thirdly is to create a mechanism where the sort of emerging regulatory frameworks or models or governance instruments can be stress tested by peers and through some kind of facility that sits between UN Habitat, UNITAC, and other agencies. So hopefully that's helpful to get us underway, to kind of differentiate with what we mean with digital inequality, but also a few practical ideas about how we can begin to build a global, regional, national, and local conversations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Edgar, for outlining that, the approach to digital inequality and link with economics, and also those practical recommendations. And I'm pleased to say that we are moving in that general direction, and look forward to engaging with different stakeholders, of course, including academia. And we'd love to reach out to you on some of those things afterwards if you're interested. Thank you for that. Moving on then, our next speaker is Emily, who's the Smart City Coordinator at the City of San Antonio, and she will talk about digital governance, digital inclusion, and digital rights in the context of COVID-19. Over to you, Emily.
Thank you so much, Pontus. I'm going to share my screen with everyone. So I will be very much presenting from a micro lens, or a very focused lens, if you will, regarding my experience working within local government. And I'm going to wait a moment for that to load. So first of all, I'd like to thank UN Habitat for inviting me to give this presentation today. I am Emily Royal. I am a Smart City Coordinator at the Office of Innovation at the City of San Antonio, which is in Texas in the United States. And as I was previously mentioning, what I'm going to share today is a very focused lens on these topics from the perspective of working in local government, and particularly how the COVID-19 pandemic very much shifted our point of view regarding these technologies at the City of San Antonio. So COVID-19 very much showed us our blind spots in local government across the United States, but certainly within the City of San Antonio. And the biggest takeaway I'd say over the last year is that technology for technology's sake simply does not work. We've learned that we must center people being served by the technologies and digital services that we deliver in the process of building it, and embrace the messiness of doing that. In particular, there's 3 areas that really transformed following the pandemic. First of all, data governance, how data flows through our organizations, and the ways that we report critical public health information to the public, the ways that we gather and pass that data through our organization and maintain transparency about the COVID-19 situation. It has broad implications for data governance as a whole. Digital equity, certainly everyone saw how remote learning and remote work transformed our understanding of how critical the digital divide situation was, in particular in the United States. And of course, privacy. As we began to think about how to track the COVID-19 symptoms and testing and all of this, developing vaccine passports, for example, these issues of privacy, mounting protests in our cities as well, related to racial justice and social justice issues and surveillance of those protests. All of this has created a condition in cities where there is a mounting concern, public concern for privacy. Cities sit at the front lines of all of these issues, in particular because we are stewards of digital rights, because we provide so many public services and digital services that collect and transmit data. But also, we are capable of making very large and significant investments in infrastructure. And our procurement, if we create ethical standards for the procurement of emerging technologies, we can shape markets. So we are very much a steward of digital rights in that space as well. And of course, cities are often the most close public institution to the communities that are facing both the positive and negative impacts of technology. So what I'm going to focus on today is really 3 areas: digital inclusion, data governance, and digital rights and public procurement from the perspective of the City of San Antonio. And to give you a sense of what the City of San Antonio really is, We are a majority Latino city. We're the 7th largest city in the United States. We have a very high poverty rate that is rapidly growing. But we're also one of the fastest growing cities in the United States, according to the American Community Survey, which is like our census from 2019 and 2020. So first, on the topic of digital inclusion, just to level set, what I'm referring to is really all the activities that are necessary to make sure that everyone has access to affordable and convenient internet access, information technology, digital skills, and devices. Now, in San Antonio, we started off really, it was actually very serendipitous that we had just completed a digital divide assessment in the city of San Antonio right before the pandemic occurred. So we had gathered quite a bit of data, both digitally and in person, which we were still able to do at the time, regarding the condition of the digital divide in our city. And we learned that about 20% of our residents don't have access to broadband internet at home. Once we gathered that data, we reported it through a series of what we called report cards, like what you get in school. And we gave the city overall a grade of a B-, but we also gave a grade to each council district. Equipped with that data and that information, once the pandemic hit and the digital divide became a huge issue, we were able to actually leverage this data to support CARES Act funding or federal stimulus funding to actually build infrastructure in support of, in particular, one stakeholder group, our students who were lacking access. We, as a result of this work, were also named a digital inclusion trailblazer by the NDIA. Touching on data governance briefly, really thinking about how governments manage data, use it equitably, and protect privacy in the process. We learned in the pandemic that what we choose to collect data about shapes our values as a city. And when we collect that data and transmit it, we really do shed light on whose lived experiences are made visible through that data and which ones are made invisible. So what I'm referring to in particular is with respect to our COVID-19 dashboards, we learned early on that we need to disaggregate this data by race to show the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on our communities of color in our community. We, as a result of this work, realized that we need to streamline how data flows through our organization. And so we developed a data governance policy, and we're transitioning into an ordinance, which takes the elements of that policy that are not subject to change, that deal with privacy, that deal with infrastructure, and codifying that into an ordinance. And then last, on digital rights and procurement, what I'm referring to here is that as society goes virtual, all these digital services that local governments are responsible for delivering need to also be accessible. They need to be safe and ethical. On this subject, the city of San Antonio is working towards a digital bill of rights, which basically provides our community with our public commitments to their rights in virtual spaces. That includes transparency, accessibility, our commitments to privacy, our commitments to equitable and secure data management. And when I say equitable, I mean we prioritize data analysis that uplifts the voices of our communities that are struggling, accessibility of digital services, dealing in particular with people with disabilities, ethical and non-discriminatory use of data and automated decision-making. This is the topic of AI. I want to just note here that everybody seems to feel like AI is a very futuristic concept. It is not. It can be very simple, and it is very much integrated into many services that we use and tools and software that we use. So we want to make sure that we're not discriminating against people in algorithmic decision-making. And then finally, equitable access to ICT. So of course, this is our digital inclusion work. And our goal is to fold the Digital Bill of Rights into a program where we unlock work streams and fund initiatives across each of these principles. And just to kind of touch, I know I'm running out of time, but we really see the digital rights as a pyramid. The foundation of that pyramid is access to internet. We can't expect people to participate in digital society if they don't have access to the internet. And we'd like to support the transition from just accessing information technology to being empowered by information technology. And this is one roadmap for what that might look like. For this audience, you know, what cities need, at least from my perspective working in local government, is a multilateral roadmap for people-centered smart cities that includes strategies for all those topics that I touched on. I think cities like San Antonio are evolving their strategies on the fly. We're flying the ship and building it at the same time, if you will. And having guidance in that space would be tremendous. Certainly tools that can help normalize and standardize digital governments and provide best practices. Capacity building is huge. Resources that allow cities to build capacity financially and operationally would be very important for cities. And of course, platforms for cities to share their experiences. I say safe space here primarily because a lot of these topics are very sensitive when we talk about AI, when we talk about surveillance. So cities need places to have those conversations and open dialogues with experts like this. And that is the end of my presentation. And I thank you all so much for inviting me and including me in the discussion.
Thank you very much, Emily. Certainly very interesting to hear from a city perspective, and thank you also for outlining the kind of needs that you see and things that UN Habitat and this broader community could support cities with. If you have links to some of those policies or strategies that you mentioned from the city, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'm sure colleagues here in the meeting would be very interested in having a look. Next up is Dr. Non, who is going to give us the perspective from Thailand. Over to you, Dr. Non.
Hi, thank you, Pontus, and thank you all the speakers. I learned so much already tonight, and well, tonight because I'm living in Thailand, so my time is in the evening. So I have a few points only today because I learned so much, and I think I might not be able to add anything to the conversations. So I'm looking forward more to the Q&A rather than to my own discussions. Just quickly about what I do and what Thailand is doing. We are trying to build smart cities just like any places in the world, any countries in the world. We believe that smart city is key to well-being and of course key to the sustainable development of the country and of course and well-being of the citizens. My presentation today only have a couple points towards the end. I hope that you're convinced by, or if not, we can have a conversation about it. First is that the key to anything that we do in the digital economy and society is that we have to think ecosystemically. I don't have a better word for it, but we have to think about things that we wanted to work with in an ecosystemic way rather than as an infrastructure or only as devices or only as things that are separate from the actual synergistic possibility for things to work together seamlessly. And the second point is that we have to make sure that the tech and the literacy works hand in hand, because we tested a few times when we have hyper tech without literacy, then we get a lot of backlashes from the citizens who don't believe that these projects will really make their life better. Or when we have a lot of literacy, but we don't have the capacities or the autonomy of tech, then we cannot really go anywhere, because, you know, at the end, just like Emily said, it's really not, it really doesn't make any sense to build a digital society without internet or without devices. So what we do here at the Digital Economy Promotion Agency or DEPA is that we try exactly to do that. We're trying to come up with strategies. These are 4 of them that we have as a master plan for the entire organizations and entire country with regards to the Thailand 4.0 national policy. We want to build people who have digital skills. We want to build an economy towards digital Thailand. We want to empower communities. And of course, we want to build an ecosystem that allows the people with digital literacy and advanced knowledge to work in the digital economy that allows them to enhance the capacity to live and learn and live and of course play, you know, live, learn, work, play, and therefore upskill and reskill, so that the communities who are not directly benefited from this can actually, you know, close the gap between their incomes and of course the incomes of the people concentrated in the city area. So in the sense, smart city, idea is not about building more cities or building better cities, but really is to close the gap between people living in the cities and people who are living outside. Or maybe they can be drawn into cities, maybe they can go and build their own. But the point is that it has to come from the understanding of the people with the sense of literacy that they have, which we built for them. So that kind of comes to the ideas that, as you can see, there are 3 different layers. The top one was the one that I was talking about, the tech, and then you have a manpower workforces that have a spectrums of literacy all the way to advanced knowledge, which include AI. And eventually, all these have to work together seamlessly in order to make the ecosystemically process a reality. So the plan that we have is that we wanted to reach at least 100 cities within the next few years. This year alone, we have 40 cities that we have already started promoting. In some ways, we divided up the smart cityness into 7 dimensions so that it could be easily categorized and easily help them with, and so on. So I just kind of want to focus on one specific dimension of smart city, which is smart governance. You know, now that we are having this conversation in the working group on digital governance, really, I think the point is that smart city is key to digital governance. And digital governance is key to smart cities. So these 2 elements actually exist synergistically. Without one of them, without digital governance, you really cannot have smart city, because smart cities is the one that no longer rely entirely on the physical infrastructure, but really is on the digital, which can do less, but actually yield more results, because you can actually do more things without having to build and take time. And on the other hand, the digital governance itself is the core, is the key to actually make smart city operable and interoperable as well. So the essential points that we trying to push forward, and I love the picture on the right, on the left so much that I have to share with you, is the idea that stakeholders in the cities are like these 2 parents. They look at the citizens as if they are parents. I don't think parents hate their kids, but picture, the kids are not happy at all because they don't learn anything about animal figures. They only learn about how animal butts look. And this is so important in the sense that I would like that sometimes, because in many cases that we've been studying and we've been implementing, we recognize is that afterward, as a hindsight bias, that we actually did a lot of things without asking the people, or without actually get the true information from the people. We thought they want this, we thought they want that, but actually they didn't want them at all. They were just kids who couldn't really have their voice, and therefore we assumed that they were happy about it. But if you look at this picture, the kids are not smiling, right? But metaphorically speaking, when citizens are not smiling, means that they are not telling the truth, which means that there might be certain protocols whereby you can get their voice heard, or the kind of systematic technological balances that allow these citizens to be, their behavior to be studied unbiasedly. That might be another way of doing it. So I just kind of wanted to conclude with the principles and components. As I said, digital governance is so important to smart city and vice versa. There are 5 principles, and I think these are all super important. I can't really think of any of these points standing out more than other, because they're equally important. First of all, digital has to be the default, not the analog. Right? We used to think that we can start with digitization and then we can go on to digitalization. That's no longer the case. We have enough technology to actually go digital from day one. So as opposed to thinking about digitization, let's start with digitizing what we have analogically. Maybe we can start thinking about, well, digital is now the default. Whatever you do outside of the domain of default, it's definitely not going to be efficient. So when you think of digital as a default, it actually gets people to understand that they have to transform their behavior into the one that leads to digital content creation rather than analog content creations. Second point is device agnostic. We believe that it's very important to include everybody into the systems. So it's not just about infrastructure like Wi-Fi, but it really is about devices. And sometimes the government has to be the one who supports target mechanism in order to deliver all these devices to the people. Third, like the picture I showed you before, the one with the babies looking at the dolls from below, it has to be from the people, from the user center services and design. So we're not talking about the kind of policy that has to come from within, but also the user interface, user experience that have to fit with the people's understandings of how they are using the devices or how they are using the systems, and not the one that we think is good for them. So user centricity has become something very central to this domain of principal digital governance. Fourth, it has to be from end to end. It has to be digital from 0 to 100, because in the sense, the only way you can actually feed each other synergistically is to make sure that everything is already composed as a digital content rather than as an analog content. And eventually, we used to think that platform as a service, mobility as a service, infrastructure as a service should be the product. So it should be the byproducts or products of the private entrepreneurship. But actually, it should be kind of half and half, because the private sectors are so good at technology, and we know that because they're driven by the market. But on the other hand, who is better than the government in terms of regulations? Well, because by default, too, governments are regulators, but that actually give a lot of power to the government, in making things that should be in the hand of the government, such as taking care of important data, taking care of important services for the people, for the cities, and of course, making sure that the operations of the private sectors that need the government support are running smoothly. So, with that, I kind of want to close, with the ASEAN Digital Master Plan, since I'm representing Thailand in some way. The ideas of which is pretty much as I mentioned about. These are the 8 components, on the right-hand side that I translated, into a small little, phase from the digital master plan. But really, what we're trying to do is to make sure that the platform level, which is the one in the middle, if you look at the from top to bottom, the bottom is the physical world, because we're not living in the metrics yet. Well, even though we're living in the metrics, we wouldn't know anyway. But the point is that this is without living in the metrics yet. Well, the thing is that the platform in the middle is what the importance of these 5 points lay. Open data, so that the profitabilities can come from private sector, and looking at the data that are anonymized, that are secure and private, and in some way protected, but then opened in some ways to the private sector to actually use them to yield more benefits to people. I think this is a good way of kind of closing my points. Yeah, I have a lot of questions for myself and also for the speakers too, and I hope that we can have these conversations in the Q&A moving forward. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Non, and really important to raise the perspective of the user there. This is why we at UN Habitat have called our Smart City program the people-centered Smart Cities program, to really highlight the importance on focusing on people who live in cities and their quality of life. Next, we will move to Serge Novaretti from the European Commission, who will tell us more about digital governance from the EU perspective, and the Living in EU declaration. Over to you, Serge.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pontus. I think you can see my screen already.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. First of all, thank you for your invitation and to speak today at this event. I think we have learned already a lot, and many things that I've heard today resonate with what I am going to present today, which is about what is behind me, the Living in EU movement. So I think it's a good, I hope, illustration of what we have heard already about digital governance. We have heard about partnership, we have heard about multi-level governance. So we decided on our side in the EU, with many cities, many city representative organizations and so on, to launch what we have called a movement. So to show that the movement, everybody can be part of the movement, and it's also something that is, of course, moving. So we started more or less 1 year ago, and I will explain what this movement is about. Of course, it is not a commission initiative, because it is a movement. So it started with cities, and cities representative, as I just said. Here, the Commission is facilitating the discussion, is supporting the movement, and we do what as far as we can do. But we are only one piece of the puzzles of the different stakeholders or partners or members of this movement. Just to say very quickly the overall policy context. So you may know that in Europe we have quite a number of priorities, but two of them are, of course, the Green Deal, so targeting to the SDGs, and also the digital strategy. Of course, this is at EU level, but many things happen, of course, at city level. So we need to work all together. So when we speak about this multi-governance, it's not a question of power, it's more a question of working together. So here in this digital transformation at local level, we have launched this movement also to be as inclusive as possible or as cohesive as possible. So it's not dealing only with capital, big cities that have the skills, the capacities, the budget to work on digital transformation, but it's mainly to work with also a city of small size, medium size, and even rural areas. So when we speak about digital transformation in the EU, we want to achieve also what we call this digital autonomy. So it's on technological aspects that I will explain, and also what I have heard today on data. So to keep our sovereignty at local level for each city on the data that they need to provide the services to citizens. When we speak also about this autonomy, we need to ensure interoperability. And Pontus referred to interoperability in his introduction of this panel. When we speak about interoperability, we mean interoperability within the city, so across different domains, also across cities and communities, and we are more and more using the word communities instead of cities. These are included in communities, but community is a broader sense, so to include, as I said, rural areas up to capitals. We need also, of course, interoperability not only between system, IT, and so on, but in a way around and also across the different stakeholders, including, of course, the citizen, and then I will come on this very quickly. And of course, we need interoperability at EU level, because if we manage to have this interoperability across borders within the EU, people can, at the city, even if they don't have the capacity, for example, on high performance computing, cloud, etc., they can rely on something that we can provide at EU level, or that big cities or national level government can provide. So to ensure that, we need interoperability, once again, not only at technical level, but at all levels. Here, just to figure where we are focusing now, this Living in You movement. We, of course, we have already seen today the different level where we need to work on. Of course, at the basis, you have the infrastructure, and then what is crucial is the data, because without any data, you cannot do everything. And then, of course, to managing those data, you need what we call digital urban platform, when you need to keep your sovereignty on the data and to be able to share the data, not only within public administration, but also with private or public-private partnership. And on top of that, and using, of course, AI, and you know that last week the Commission has issued a document presenting new rules on the European way to AI. And here we are also focusing on one of the projects that is quite appealing to mayors, to politicians, but also to citizens, because with what we call city digital twins, we can help also city to achieve the SDGs. So digital twins are a kind of course, a twin in the digital world of a city. So it's not only a 3D dimension of a city, it's everything that can be simulated in the city. So it could be, of course, the buildings, the geographical area, but it's also the traffic. So to simulate the mobility, it could be also the energy consumption, water consumption, and so on. So in that sense, using a digital twin, and we have already well-advanced cities in Europe that have already their digital twin, they can simulate events, so they can plan and take better decisions because they can see what will be the impact of a decision in 1, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and they can simulate also the impact of a decision and how this decision can help achieving the SDG and mitigate climate and reduce the footprint. So this is a few projects. I will not go into details that we have on the digital twins. What we decided and why we had this Living in You movement is that we say that up to now we have developed a lot of projects, and now we need to scale up those solutions. So to cover all the EU and all cities, and to help cities to in this digital transformation at a local level. So we launched this Living in You movement. It was launched in Oulu, Finland, under the Finnish presidency in December 19. And this living movement, to join it, we need a political will, because of course at local level nothing will happen if the mayor is not behind any decision, and the full team around the mayor. So it starts with the declaration, which is called Join, Boost, Sustain. So joining forces, boosting, so scaling up, and then sustain towards a Green Deal. Up to now, we have we are close now to 100 cities that have joined this movement. Of course, also we have supporters. So it's not only cities that can join, but we have also academia, private industry, SMEs, civic societies that can support. And even outside the EU, we have also cities and other organizations that are like-minded in a way, and that can also support. And we are working within the EU, but also at international area. So what is in this movement, very quickly, is all the principles that we about being citizen-centric, responding to city needs, because at EU level, for example, we cannot invent the needs, we have to listen to the city. Of course, is to manage the data in a socially responsible and ethical way, and respecting digital rights that we have heard from San Antonio City, and of course, using what we call open standard technical specification to ensure interoperability. So this multi-level governance that I have referred to is, of course, supported by the European Commission, the Committee of the Regions, but we have also Eurocities, we have the Open and Agile Smart City, the European Network of Living Labs, and many cities that are behind. And when you join the movement, you commit on different streams. And here we have heard also today that we need to tackle different aspects, and they are all there. There is only one that I want to highlight, because some people in the previous panel were speaking about we need something like the SDGs for smart cities. So under where you can see here the monitoring and measuring, we are currently developing what we call a local and regional digital indicators, and this will help cities to situate where they are in the digital transformation and how to reach and to become smart and sustainable. So this could be in a way compared to the SDGs, but for smart and sustainable cities. Here, just to illustrate that we are launching also, and we are defining what we call a European interoperability framework for smart cities and communities. This is to bring all domains within the cities together with also regional, national, and EU level, and to ensure that we have interoperability among all those domains and also all stakeholders. This document will be issued in June for the first release, and of course you are invited also to comment and to work with us on this one, because this one may become even outside the EU. So in a nutshell, I think my time is done. You can, of course, if you are in Europe as a politician at national, regional, local level, to sign and to join the movement. For, of course, outside, we are really open to work with, and we are already working with Japan, with South Africa. We have that meeting with African cities also. So we're really open to share what we are doing in the EU. And of course, because behind that, even if the Living EU movement is demand-driven, we are also working on the market side, offering side, to ensure that the solutions that will be developed will answer the needs of the cities within the EU, but also outside the EU, because we need a vibrant market around cities. In Europe, we have 85,000 cities, so it's already a lot. I don't want to count how many cities all over the world, but it's a big market at the same time. So thanks for your attention, and I will be, of course, available for any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Serge. Very interesting to hear about all the things that you're doing connected to the Living in the EU movement and declaration. Perhaps you can put in the chat the link to the declaration, so colleagues here in the meeting can also read it. Finally, before we go to discussion, I would like to invite Joachim Formo, the Strategic Design Director of Ericsson, to just say a few words about the private sector perspective here. And perhaps we're particularly interested in understanding how the private sector and the public sector, how tech companies and local governments can find good ways and find appropriate governance frameworks to work together to achieve this vision that all the previous speakers have more or less outlined. Joachim, are you here?
I am, yeah, hi.
Excellent.
Happy to be here. I'm happy to represent the others, the private sector in this community. So I have a couple of reflections. I think you all have mentioned very valid points and show lots of kind of understanding and insights from your perspective. And I'm sort of complementing that a little bit from my experience as working for a huge tech company, oftentimes in partnership with the public sector or academia. I think that one kind of key learning is that we tend to fall back to kind of view things in kind of dualisms, like it's the public sector is a customer of technology and the private sector is the kind of manufacturer or supplier. I think that is working at many different levels. That is kind of non-tech people and tech people, and it's also, sorry, someone need to mute. So thanks. And in many of the things I've been involved with, there is a kind of a need of some kind of, and someone have mentioned words like broker or barrister, or someone to kind of bridge the linguistic kind of mismatch, which is also oftentimes kind of a point of view mismatch, or even norms and cultural mismatch between different sectors. So just to be aware and learn to know those things across different sectors is so super important, I think, in order to actually bring the public sector or cities or much earlier in technology development. Because otherwise, the technology that will be sort of off the shelf available 10 years from now will be shaped by the sort of technology sweetness and the business models that is kind of inherent in companies that have essentially just one bottom line. And there will be sort of very difficult, not impossible, but more difficult to influence and change that. And the private companies that provide technology is not really that imaginative. They tend to work with quite limited and technical problem solving mainly before handing things over to marketing and sales, where they develop business models based on what they can see in their kind of market intelligence. And if we have partners much earlier in tech development, like we have had a couple of times with UN Habitat and a number of cities and regions, I think that is so important, both to shape the future technologies that will be available, as well as to educate each other across sectors, actually, about the kind of tacit terminologies and behaviors and point of views that we have in the different sectors. So that's kind of a main reflection, that is valuable, but it's very hard to describe, for example, in any kind of public procurement or kind of request for quotes or proposals. And the most effective thing that I can see to bridge those gaps is practice-based co-creation, small scale, but that can produce examples that we can use as kind of a narrative for future tech in cities. And I think presentations that we've seen today works very much on a kind of a system level, kind of an academic abstract level. What we could kind of improve understanding by would be to also include concrete cases that can kind of be used as some kind of a narrative to explain better how these things could be applied. I'll just continue talking until you stop me, Pontus. So, and another thing, when we talk about co-creating with citizens and kind of involving citizens and communities in different kinds of labs or tests or whatever we call it, I think a huge challenge that we need to look at is how to invite individual citizens to issues that will really be something at a collective level. Things like big data and big data analytics, AI and machine learning typically operates at like a huge collective level, where it sort of is pointless or uninteresting for the individual. We talk about individual privacy and data integrity and those things, but the real value for the tech private sector is to combine everything to find things that you can't possibly do otherwise, and to sort of increase the understanding of those impacts, both good and bad. I think that is an essential challenge that we need to look at when it comes to involving citizens and communities in developing and testing and co-creating these things. That's a difficult one.
Thank you so much, Joachim, for that interesting reflection. I think with that, let's open up the floor for questions. We have about 20-25 minutes for discussion. You can either write in the chat your questions, or feel free to put up your hand as well. There's an icon at the top of your screen that is like a hand and a face. If you click on that, you can get the raise hand possibility. Any questions for our panelists here? Any reflections?
Pontus, I had a quick reflection, if I may.
Please, go ahead, Jaideep.
Thanks, Pontus. I just wanted to, first of all, fantastic and really rich presentations from everyone that I really enjoyed. Reflecting on Edgar's sort of profound commentary at the start of this session, a couple of things that arise from the work that we've been doing with cities in the Global South, in South Asia in particular, in the past months during COVID, and specifically to understand the use of data and digital infrastructures in their response to the pandemic. Two things stand out is that the need to maintain analog infrastructures, particularly where the goal is to include marginalized communities. And second, the importance of decentralized and privacy enhancing public health infrastructures at a sub-municipal, even a ward and neighborhood level. So I wondered how this reflects on the digitized and I suppose centralized visions of the smart city. And if Edgar is still with us, it'd be great to hear his reflections on these sort of sub-municipal scales, but equally the other panelists may wish to reflect on the need for analog systems moving forward.
Thank you, Jaideep. Edgar, are you with us, and would you like to make a response?
Sure. Yeah, I'm still here. Not that I, have not been tempted to sneak out to the loo, but I'm still here. Thanks, Jaideep, and it'd be really fascinating to hear a little bit more about your findings, and if you could say a little bit more about what kind of analog infrastructures were proven to be really essential in the context of COVID. So for me, and I guess this is, there is this sort of scalar question about institutional capacity and design, and where does one locate power within the system, right? So yes, of course, I think everyone is in agreement that given the amount of novelty of a lot of the technology, the complexity of retrofitting technology into really sort of 20th century institutional sensibilities and frameworks and regulatory systems in particular, there is so much uncertainty and unforeseen sort of feedbacks that it is really important to do that co-production work. But within that, of course, given the sort of general direction of the technology and the kinds of expertise that is valorized and that is considered to be fundamental, there are real power asymmetries within these things. And I think that the tendency is often to focus on, for lack of a better word, mature markets. In other words, these are commercial areas or middle-class enclaves where there is a tax base, and not necessarily where arguably some of these innovations are most needed, which is where sort of poorer majorities live. So for that reason, the sort of one of the remarks I made maybe very quickly is precisely this point that I think for me what is most promising about digital platforms as the ways in which it can allow us to do something really essential in the short term, and that is to figure out what alternative service delivery models where you've got these variable incomes. In other words, people can't pay necessarily a fixed amount on a monthly basis or weekly basis for a service, but that they can put sweat equity into the design and the operation of a certain basic service. And also the sort of potential for decentralized logics and systems. If we look at energy systems, for example, or nature-based systems for stormwater drainage management, which can be connected with sensors and so forth. So there's sort of a whole institutional framework that I think can be built out that blends community control, radical decentralization, a folding of these imperatives into a social economy frame, and in which we see the social economy as a bridge from informality to potential formal jobs and the formal labor market. And so I think that you sort of really put your finger on something very important about the need for these capabilities at a very fine-grained scale of the city. And I think that a lot of the sort of institutional instincts in rolling out these infrastructures is very much because we believe in interoperability, in holistic integration, etc. The idea is to have a comprehensive model. And that, of course, for actors that aren't very well organized or very powerful, it's very difficult to have their interest rise to the top of those frameworks. So I think that there's no fixed answer, I think, but I think it's an absolutely critical point for further reflection and discussion. So thanks, Jadeb, for raising those points.
Jaideep, did you want to add anything else to that? I think there was also a question about some of those analog things that were really successful in India in COVID times.
Sure, Pontus. You know, why don't I put a link in the chat so that people can have a look? But just to, you know, one example is the use of sort of fairly rudimentary communication systems based around WhatsApp, which then connected up with rather analog networks of trusted health infrastructures. And these proved to be really essential in making those quick decisions on a day-to-day basis. But I won't hog the time now. I'll put a link to a paper that, Pontus, you were very kind to feed in on as well. So.
Thanks. Yeah, please share that. Any other questions or comments from the floor here? Abdi Nasser, over to you. I see your hand.
Thanks, Pontus. I had a quick question for Emily. Emily, thanks to you for a presentation and all the other speakers also. So you spoke about Antonio in your city doing the digital divide assessment and sort of coming in the end with a score. Can you a bit clarify for me, if possible, some of the factors that went into that and how you went about if there were any gaps in the data?
Yes, I can also link to a paper that was published in an academic journal, Cities, on this particular assessment. So what we did is, first of all, as a local government, we did recognize the lack of capacity that we had as a very small team to conduct a citywide survey on our own. So we contracted our local university to conduct the survey in partnership with us. The challenge is that San Antonio is a massive city, and we're also a very sprawling city. We have quite a few suburban regions as well that fall within our jurisdiction and also suffer from the digital divide. So we recognized very early on that one cannot study the digital divide through a digital or a virtual assessment online. So it did require us to send teams of individuals, of public health workers, to go into some of these neighborhoods that we do know are particularly subject to the digital divide, to conduct the survey in person. There's so much to say about this. First of all, the way that we prioritized those neighborhoods was through what was called an equity atlas, which is essentially a GIS layer that integrates factors such as income level, race, family, household family status and income. And we were able to see which parts of our community are areas that we should prioritize visiting in person. We targeted our outreach to those areas. And then we made sure that for each zip code, we had a sample size that reflected the population that we know demographically exists in that community. So we needed to make sure basically that the sampling of each district or of each zip code accurately reflected the distribution of the demographics of the people that live there. So we did all of that, and primarily our local university did all of that work. And then published it in an academic journal. We received about, I'd say, almost 7,000 responses, and then ensured that the sample size was enough to conclude the results that we concluded. And then, of course, we assessed really across 3 domains: connectivity, so access to infrastructure and internet infrastructure; digital literacy, so assessing the skills of individuals to be able to use digital services and the internet. And then the last one was accessibility to devices. Are they using a phone? Are they using a laptop, a desktop, etc.? Hope that answers your question. There's quite a bit of information, but I will put a link to that paper in the chat as well.
It does. Thank you very much, and we'll take a look at the paper. Thanks again.
Any other comments or questions? If not, I have a question on something that I've been thinking about a lot, and some of my colleagues who are working on policy and governance are aware that I raise this in various forums. But we talk a lot about the need for digital governance, but I still feel that we are maybe not totally clear on what we actually really mean by digital governance. What would a kind of exemplary or model digital governance framework for a city look like? I feel there's so many things that come into it. You know, you have the regulations, you have the policy, you have the kind of democratic institutions, you have the power relations, and then you start getting into also more technical and practical things like procurement guidelines, or having a digital transformation strategy, or the actual platforms for managing data, for doing public participation, etc. And I feel like perhaps a discussion is needed on what do we actually mean by digital governance. So I'd like to maybe throw that out to the panelists. If each of you are able to briefly reflect on that, what would a kind of ideal digital governance framework for a city look like, and what would it include? I guess it's a big question, but I hope that would be okay. Maybe we can let's go from the back. We can start with Serge.
Thank you, Pontus, for this very easy question. A difficult answer. Of course, first, I think you need the political will. This is what I said also when I was speaking about these declarations that create this movement living in the EU, because without political will at the highest level of the city and even beyond, you cannot achieve anything. So it's really something between the political will and how to engage citizens. So, and then you need to fill the gap between the two, including all digital technologies in the middle. So it's not an easy exercise. Of course, you need, of course, to meet today. Nowadays, it's not very possible that people can meet. So to have some committee where people feel the trust among all of them. I think it's what we have heard also today, that we need to engage with all stakeholders, but they don't feel some people just to follow what the city wants, but also to be part of this co-design, co-creation, and so on. So we need to set up this kind of committee or whatever. And of course, you should have different level, because this is at political level with CEO of company, because at the end, as I said, you need data. And if you want to have data, and if you don't have both the political will and also the will, in a way, of all of the CEOs of the companies that are delivering the services and that are owning the data, I am speaking about public transport, parking, energy, supplier, and so on. So you need to have this agreement at the very top level, and then, of course, to decline everything on the different domains, cross-domain, and so on, and then to ensure that you have further data, and then to engage citizens. So it's, of course, a lot of things. It's not easy to navigate and to coordinate everything. But once again, my first thing is really this political and will ensuring that everything is on board and at more or less at the same level of being able to provide ideas to co-create, and at the end of the day to benefit about the evolution of the smart city towards this digital transformation and also towards the green transition. So yeah, to make it short, because of course it's...
Thank you, Serge. Dr. Non, would you like to reflect on this as well?
Certainly, Pontus, and I think I'm going to try my best because I think we have a limited time. And in fact, in Thailand, we have another organization called the Digital Government Promotion Agency, who is in charge of that. But let me try to kind of at least come up with a few categories of what I think is digital governance. One is definitely public services. These are activities that are legitimate only when it is in the hand of the government, like public services, tax collections, providing infrastructural usage that are only that belongs to the government, and it should only belong to the government, things like that. So public services is actually very important, because when you have people using the services inappropriately, then you actually incubate a lot of economic activities that leads to all kinds of notion of smartness within the framework of smart city and beyond. The other thing is the law and order. Of course, the ideas of negative externalities is very important. So you have digital governance, sometimes in digital governments are operating in the domain that policing, right, law and order, making sure that nobody use more environmental resources they should be using, and so on. So that's the second category. And the third one, I think, is getting added into the domains. The overall domain is the inclusion, because we're now thinking about the ideas of closing the gap between the privileged and underprivileged. How do we make sure that educations are something that's accessible by all, things like that. So I think these are three domains that would be best to be done, of course, with the technology developed by the private sector, because as I mentioned, they were driven by market mechanism. So government shouldn't be spending time inventing a cloud system. We should be using the services that are already available, but using them in such a way that provided cybersecurity and provided the data protections that allows people who are benefiting from the services to be able to understand that their privacy is not invaded. So I think that's pretty much it for what I believe in the domain of smart city that I'm working on to be important. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Non. And Emily, any thoughts?
Yes, sorry, the mute button froze for a second. So from my end, I would say there's really about 5 areas where at least local governments can get started. The first one, and I like to think of it in terms of that pyramid that I was showing earlier in my presentation, is access to internet, right? This is really just the foundation. We cannot allow or envision people to participate in a digital society if they don't fundamentally have access to infrastructure. It's like that simple. So this is where a lot of cities are starting, because this is arguably the foundation of the digital governance challenge as a whole. Enabling or creating digital citizens requires that they actually can access ICT. I think from there, it builds into, okay, if everyone is online, what commitments are we making to the public when they interact with the government, when they interact with digital services provided by the government? And that's where you get into the framework of digital rights and a digital bill of rights, which basically is the public commitment that you're making as a local government to your residents, touching on all of these issues: privacy, security. I think security about data is actually very important. What infrastructure can cities put in place to actually make the commitment that the data that's collected about an individual is secured? How can you communicate that to your public? Data sharing, right? Making sure that we're creating commitments to how we are publicly sharing this information with the residents themselves, and empowering them to unlock their own insights around data, as well as various organizations that rely on the city's data assets to make their own decisions. That includes research organizations, that includes universities, it includes the private sector as well. So thinking about that in the framework of a digital Bill of Rights. And then once you've made those commitments, the question becomes, well, how do you operationalize all of the work streams in those commitments? And I think that's where you get quite a bit into data governance, which really just goes over all of those topics, but also includes things like open data, ensuring data integrity, and creating and operationalizing the infrastructure that you're putting in place to actually manage all of these assets, not just from the communities that you obviously collect data from, but also from the technologies that you put into public space that generate new types of data sets that you've never seen before. And that's where we get into like IoT and all of these issues with AI and things like that. So that's the kind of infrastructure piece. The fourth area that I think is really critical for digital governance strategy is procurement. Something that I think is a very deep discussion for a lot of cities, but if you think about it, a local government is not one unified entity. My local government is made up of 45 different departments. They all procure technology, they all purchase technology on a daily basis. So creating standards within the organization and guidelines to guide those departments for what are best practices when you encounter emerging technology, and really baking that into the procurement process, which is very challenging. Procurement is very rigid. So going to a procurement department and saying, hey, you need to include these new guidelines now for IoT, for AI, for data governance, right? That could be challenging, but that's a critical point of intervention. One thing I will also just highlight as kind of an easy target for local governments is ownership in procurement. We've discovered that one of the biggest challenges that we face when we buy new technology that collects data is we don't own the data. And if we don't own the data, then we can't leverage it to the best of our ability to serve the public. So that's a kind of an easy, quick win, if you will, in procurement contracts to consider. And then the last one is participation. How do we engage our community and create or unlock opportunities for them to co-create these strategies? I think one great way to do that is through that digital Bill of Rights concept, where you put out there, your public commitments, but also invite the community to shape that document with you. Because by shaping that document, by putting that through a city council that approves of it, for example, you're creating those work streams for the city to begin to operationalize and implement everything that's in that commitment of a digital Bill of Rights. So those are some of my thoughts, just coming from a very pragmatic lens of trying to get this work actually accomplished in local government.
Thank you, Emily. And then finally, Edgar.
Yeah, thanks. Not much to add. I mean, my colleagues have all been extremely comprehensive, and I certainly thought both Non and Emily's presentations gave us, and Serge's actually excellent examples at different scales, sort of European regional scale, the national scale in Thailand, and then, of course, the urban scale in the US, of what lives in these things. I guess my starting point is a little bit different. I think, we've got lots of examples now of what these packages are, these policy packages, if you will. I guess my big concern and question is, to pick up on Serge's point, that political commitment is vital. And I would just sort of, and I'm sure he implied that, but sort of add it's political commitment and leadership, right? There's got to be real vision and leadership about sort of how this can be a transformative agenda, but connecting that with building the understanding and the sort of capacity for visioning, for oversight, and for voice from within the constituencies that is most marginal in the urban system. For me, that is what we don't know as yet, because there is such a neat fit between these technologies and, if you will, how things get done within the political economy of cities in terms of how resources are apportioned, how priorities are set, and so forth. So that kind of political economy knot of distributional effects of how the policy machine works, that for me is what is unclear. And I certainly don't have an answer. I do know that the sort of movements that represent these constituencies need to be organized and sort of claim them. But how one engineers that from a policy point of view, I have no idea. The second point to make to that is, and I really appreciated Serge's comment and the discourse of building a movement across the EU, right? So for me, that is absolutely essential, connected with the idea of a digital bill of rights that Emily spoke about. But again, you know, there's a real gap between, I think, the normative ambitions and just the sort of the sort of bloody knuckle nature of urban politics and decision making and resource allocation. And I think we need a much more precise and honest discussion about those dynamics if we are going to generate not just useful policy, but transformative politics. Thank you.
I'd like to build off of that, Edgar, because I think that's a really great point that you're making. So it sounds like the question is, how do we truly and authentically bake public participation and public guidance into the policies that we generate? How do we do grassroots policy making, if you will? I don't have the answer completely, but I do know from some experience, some challenges that we've encountered. One of them is understanding that the conversation we're having right now is one that we have a privilege to have. At least my residents, my constituencies, I'm told when I put policy out there or I put anything on our website, it must be at a 6th grade reading level, right? This is the reality of our community. Reality of our community is also that many of them have at least 2 jobs, if not 3. And how do I, as a policymaker, intervene in their life and ask for their input, right, on a particular issue? How do I translate smart cities into a dialogue with residents that are really trying to survive, right, fundamentally? This is an open question, and it's I think for a city like San Antonio, probably the most important one when we talk about people-centered smart cities or people-centered anything, right? How do we reach residents where they are, if you will? This is an ongoing challenge that we experience.
Great, thank you for all those really insightful reflections on digital governance. I'd really like to thank the panel. It's been fantastic. Thank you so much for taking your time to participate in this meeting, and we look forward to engaging with all of you more also after the meeting itself. There are, I think, many opportunities to collaborate on different things around this topic. So thank you very much again. I just want to do a very quick brief summary of a few things that I picked up before I pass over to my colleague Anne. The first one is the importance on focusing of a people-centered approach, focusing on users, communities, dealing with the digital divide, digital inequality, etc. There's been too much focus on tech and not enough on people, and I think the debate is moving in that direction. Now we need to get practical. How do we actually do it? And I hope that UN Habitat can really make a difference there. The second one is to broaden the understanding of digital divide. I think that's been really focused on internet access, and of course that is a fundamental, important thing, having access to internet, but it's not enough. There are huge issues to do with culture, to do with language, to do with digital literacy, skills, affordability, etc. That needs to be also considered in the digital divide. Issue of interoperability has come up a lot. It's really important. We've seen a lot of cities getting locked into technology for a long time through long-term contracts and using technology and continue to use technology and platforms that are perhaps no longer suitable for their needs. Interoperability, being able to change provider in a kind of in an easy way, if you like, is really key to that. And then I think also the point of bridging the gap between the public and private sector is really important. Joachim alluded to this, but I'm going to make it a bit stronger. Cities actually have enormous power here to influence the way that technological development happens. And I think that they're not, in most cases, fully realized that procurement is a really, really important tool for driving, influencing technological change. If cities, for example, put in very strong ethical considerations in their procurement guidelines, then that will influence the way that, for example, artificial development research and innovation happens. Cities really have more power here than they think, I think, or they realize. And the final thing is about leadership. For too long in the public sector, this digital governance issue has been, or digital in general, has been considered to be something for the IT department, and that's of course important. But we need to get some more strategic leadership here. We need to bring it to the center of everything that we're doing. I think this is really the time for local governments to put more effort in and more kind of strategic leadership on issues to do with digital. And I think that would kind of level the playing field a bit between cities and between the tech companies. Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to Anna-Min, who will take us to the final session of the EGM.
Thank you, Pontus. Thank you, Pontus. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see the slides.
Excellent. Let me try and put it on the correct mode. Now it's just all right. Okay. So thank you again, Pontus, for an excellent summary, as well as the great moderation throughout the session. And thank you also for all the speakers and the participants who have been with us for the full 2 days or even just for today. I've really enjoyed the discussions and also learned a lot from all of you. I think we have a lot here to work with in the future for our governance work. And well, first of all, my name is Anna-Min and I work with the Policy, Legislation and Governance section. And I'm leading the governance work at the moment. And I just wanted to quickly go through to sort of brief again, what are we working on at the moment in governance, and then how we plan to take this work from and the ideas and the suggestions coming from this 2-day EGM into our work later. So we currently have 3 areas of governance that we're looking at. We look at local governance from the point of view of strengthening the urban governance to realize the Sustainable Development Goals and the New Urban Agenda. We look at the perspective of multi-level governance, focusing on the vertical and horizontal coordination for policy implementation. And this one includes also metropolitan management, as well as multi-stakeholder partnerships, where we rethink or try to reposition the relationship between the public and private actors to enhance public sector investment. In this category, maybe what Ilde was referring to as network governance could also fall into here. We have currently 4 different kinds of interventions that we concentrate on. We do mainly normative work, whereas we develop tools and methodologies, as well as try to identify best practices in the field. We do technical cooperation, which includes also testing and the implementation of the normative tools and methodologies that we have developed. We do partnerships, of course, and advocacy between different kinds of stakeholders, as well as knowledge and awareness, seminars, workshops, webinars, and so on. We also try to produce case studies and training events, and develop and disseminate discussion papers and research publications. This is just a quick overview of the normative tools that we've developed recently. Perhaps the most recent one is the Guide on Multi-Level Governance for Health Equity. The other one would be the Guidelines for Voluntary Local Reviews, where for connecting the voluntary local reviews and the voluntary national reviews. We have the Governance Assessment Framework for Metropolitan, Territorial and Regional Management, as well as the Guidelines for Voluntary Local Reviews, the first volume, which is a comparative analysis of the existing voluntary local reviews. These are the most recent publications or tools that we have developed. We are also currently developing quite a few other guides or tools on climate action, migration, decision-making, national urban policies, civic engagement and citizenship, and subsidiarity. We're also working on some sort of checklists or governance frameworks for the flagship programs of UN Habitat. The digital governance part is mainly taken by our colleagues, Pontus, Melissa, from the Innovation Unit, but we also engage in some urban governance labs that we have held, for example, recently in Cameroon, to support some selected countries to move forward with their digital transformation for better urban governance and empowering local communities and making them as actors of change. So this is just to give you a quick snapshot of what we're currently doing. And these are our key takeaways from the EGM. And I will hand over now to Remy to go over the key takeaways from these 2 days of discussions. Remy, over to you.
Thank you, Anne. We not also start with the thank yous to everybody. But just to give you, for those who were here yesterday or were not here, just to give you a snippet of what we noted down in terms of taking forward and consider in our work. When it came to the area of inventions, we heard a lot about the equity when it comes to social and economic dimension, the importance of migration, we heard even today, land, youth and employment, housing, public service delivery, innovation, and so forth. Health was really at the center in the context of COVID-19 recovery. We also heard about climate change. Yesterday, Pontus, there was also discussion on digital innovation and the rights. There was a very nice twist on the context of what governance means in the context of peace building or safety and security, for instance, in the spirit of leaving no one and no place behind. There was a very vibrant discussion on the nexus between governance and decentralization, or revisited decentralization, in the context as well of the localization of the SDGs, as many of you are involved with. So we heard about, yes, decentralization, engagement with stakeholders, but the financing mechanism had to be there to enable some of this governance mechanism to work. So on the next slide, we looked at on the priority actions. We were asked to look at that we could focus very much on the area of fiscal decentralization, not only decentralization of function, but also the fiscal means. But besides that, or added to that particular decentralization, but empowering local authorities or subnational authorities to leverage and mobilize their own resources. So that what can governance do to actually empower that twin approach of fiscal decentralization and local revenue generation. beside the participation, it was very much about inclusion. I think we discussed even today that is really about co-creation, co-development, and co-ownership. So that was also the thread yesterday in the discussion. The multi-level governance was very important, but the focus was very much about the how we can do so. And again, the partnership. Now on the next one, sorry, yeah, you are right. On the multi-level governance in particular, what came out in terms of that context and matters a lot. We have to take into account that dimension. Coordination and cooperation really had to be at the center to make that co-governance work. Again, the issue of decentralization and collaboration. There was a very interesting discussion on, is the political will enough? Is it, yes, it's important, but is it enough? Does it cost anything, or is too costly? So if it's well used, it may cost nothing, but if it's poorly implemented, it might be very expensive aspect if you are not taking that into consideration in the governance work. So it ends up in the multi-level governance that is really about engagement. It's not only about participation, but engagement of all actors involved in that, not only at the government level, but all actors. The other was the focusing also on the approaches. We have to look at, I think today we also heard that, the how that can be done, and the issue of roles and responsibilities, that we should be able to identify who is doing what and so forth. Next, Anne. Just to look at the discussion on the really on the partnership or the networking, or how you can work together in that co-creation, co-development in the sphere of governance. It was important that we try to revisit or look again at some of the principles of urban governance that would guide our work. That is not given, so we may need a little bit of education, awareness, and capacity development so that we can have long-term or long-term change in our learning process. That we have to do so through a lab, so testing different things, putting spaces for that engagement through platforms and so forth. And today we heard a few examples in that case as well. Again, the issue of a repository, put in place a repository of instruments that can support those was very important. The role of academia and research was also highlighted in terms of enhancing partnership. And we heard that we have to have some cases, how that can be done to enhance partnership. Again, the process of interdisciplinary governance is multi-layer, multi-sector, there are many dimensions in the governance, so we have to look at the different disciplines that can contribute to making that effective. So again, the big words here being the co-designing, co-producing, co-ownership. So really about working together. The last slide, Anne, was what we just discussed. I think Ponta did a good job in summarizing. Just to pick a few here is really that issue of the digital divide and the democratic rights. So again, what can we do as a UN Habitat? We are just looking at how we can move, maybe creating some tools in addressing some of the dimensions that came, tools to what type of tools can we propose to reduce the digital divide in the spectrum that Pontus explained. What type of interventions can we propose in terms of regulations to improve governance? What type of instruments can be proposed to increase that space for participation through the democratic rights and other roles and responsibility. How would the platform look like for that co-creation, co-development, and the partnership? So we got some reference points, and we have to do a bit of exercise internally to see where are the regulatory gaps and where we can actually add value. So Pontus, that's what we are moving forward from where we are and how you can strengthen our collaboration or take the work on the urban governance a bit further based on really the great input from all of you in guiding us in reshaping the future of urban governance at UN Habitat. Over to you, Pontus.
I think, Remy, we will give the floor now to Neil for his final remarks.
Thank you very much, Anne. I'm trying to put on my camera, so that's me. Nice to see all of you, Jaideep, Remy, colleagues. Thank you very much. I have been given some notes, and I've been in the expert group meeting for the last 1.5 hours. So it's been really exhilarating, and I only wish that I could spend more time. But the reality of the job is that one doesn't have that privilege of being here. So firstly, let me thank our all the panelists, all the experts, and also our colleagues from the policy, legislation, and governance section for organizing and running this very significant event. I say it's very significant because, as you all know, the high-level midterm review of the strategic plan of the UN Habitat will take place in late June, when the CPR meeting, when member states meet in late June in the CPR meeting. So this is a very good opportunity to make sure, as Remy had echoed, some of these key inputs are actually translated into action. So thank you so much for all the inputs. I was told that the dialogue sessions from the past 2 days have demonstrated that what we really need is inclusive and effective governance as a foundation for sustainable urbanization. I think that is almost a given, but it's good to get your views to confirm this. Particularly in this time where we are still, going through difficult times with COVID-19 and the socio-economic fallout subsequently. We at UN Habitat believe that the basis for sustainable urbanization is really to promote the rights of all people and ensuring that all urban residents reap the benefits of urbanization. And I think this is really an important time to think about how to be more participatory, to be more consensus-oriented, accountable, transparent, responsive, effective, efficient, equitable, and inclusive. And I'm really heartened by Ms. Royal's comments. Sorry, I to put you on the spot, but since I was only here in the last 1.5 hours, I was really taken and very impressed by the examples of how we should move, not only from consulting people, but really from to get them involved in policy making in very difficult difficult times. So there have been several successful and common positions and joint strategy on urban governance that this group has advocated. One on the idea of the future of urban governance. I come from a finance background, so I truly believe in governance because without that, you really cannot sustain any financing system. So in this case, it's very important that we have a clear commitment to reduce urban poverty reduction. In our cities and pandemics report, we have advocated for a new social contract. And I think that urban and social leaders must have a long-term strategic vision for sustainable human development. So UN Habitat stands ready to engage with governments, with other stakeholders to strengthen urban governance, taking into consideration and adapting as necessary the dynamism of players, processes, and nature and the variability of different contexts. And I say this as we are now planning for the World Urban Forum, the 11th session of the World Urban Forum, and we really would like to make sure that we have a good head start in reaching out to all of you from academia, subject experts, stakeholders, so that we truly have a very good World Urban Forum going forward. We are also very concerned about multi-level governance. In this case, as you know, it's important to have coordination among the tiers of government. I participate quite actively in the World Economic Forum, where UN Habitat is also one of the key players. And I can tell you that a lot of local governments feel that in these times when there is actually a lot of funding, it is important to ensure that we tailor the principles of inclusiveness as an underpinning for multi-level governance. And to this context where the hierarchical system of government is not particularly clear-cut, we really need to ensure that we promote a coherent and efficient way of intervening. And I think I see UN Habitat playing a role here. With regards to partnerships in governance, multi-stakeholder partnerships help advance a more integrated, comprehensive, and scalable approach to poverty eradication. I think the key word here is scalable. The whole of society approach, you'll be glad to know that even internally at UN Habitat, we have an all-of-house approach. And we believe in this wholeheartedly, and we are practicing it internally. And we believe that we need to reflect on the tools and mechanisms that involve the general public in developmental processes and that shift decision-making power from policymakers to citizens. That is something which is fundamental to our approach to development. On digital governance, while visualizing the huge potential of technological innovations in our cities, and I come from Malaysia, so you can imagine with COVID, you have to check in everywhere. Let's not forget the inclusion, human rights, and participation aspects, as Pontus had explained, of smart, innovative, and sustainable cities. This element, the human element, should not be set aside. I know it's easier to just focus on the technology, but it is essential to ensure that smart cities are people-centered. As the executive director says, yes, it's important to have a smart city, but we also need to make sure that we have smart people. So how can we use innovation to reduce the growing inequalities we see in many places? It is one of the questions worth reflecting as we close out this EGM. So let me explain some of our corporate vision. We believe in a better quality of life for all in an urbanizing world. And we do this through our mantra, think, do, partner, and share. So this is really a good opportunity for us to put this into practice. And I've been told that this is been very evident in the past 2 days of this EGM. So it is my hope that we have collected your ideas, best practices, inspirations, and will continue to strengthen the existing partnership and networks that we have. And we must find creative ways to operationalize them in our respective countries and organizations. I've asked the team actually to look at all these so-called normative tools. Who is using them? If a partner or a country or a city say they're using them, how have they budgeted for them? How are they bringing it to the ground? Because I think we really need to localize the SDGs, and it's important. And of course, governance is an important aspect. But most importantly, let's be action-oriented as we improve urban governance. Finally, I would like to take the opportunity to remind all of us that we need to look carefully at challenges and opportunities of urbanization and ensure that our cities and human settlements are governed in a way that is inclusive, effective, and sustainable. So sincere congratulations once again to the organizers of this EGM. On behalf of the Executive Director, thank you so much for your contributions. And over back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neil. Maybe Remy, if you want to say anything. Otherwise, we'll just say thank you for everyone for these wonderful 2 days. Really appreciate the enthusiasm until the end. Sometimes we get tired before the end bit gets there, but I think the discussion was very lively until the very end. So thank you, everyone. And Remy, if you want to say anything, I want to say just a quick thank you also to all of our excellent moderators. They've really put a big effort into this. Also to Aida, especially, she jumped in the last minute because Eduardo unfortunately had to travel to Mexico and was not available to do the moderation for the session 3. I think, Aida, you did a great job. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, and bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anne.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Good evening. Good day. Bye.
Bye-bye. Interesting session indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.